Rain fell hard on the cracked sidewalks of South Side Chicago, tapping rhythms only Elijah Carter could understand. He stood alone under a rusted street lamp, clutching a soggy spiral notebook in one hand and a piece of chalk in the other. His breath fogged in the cold night air as he stared at the empty wall beside the corner store, his makeshift blackboard. He dropped his bag to the curb and knelt down, drawing careful white lines that glowed under the light like equations whispered from the stars. Just a few hours earlier, that same chalk had gotten him kicked out of math class. "Don't be a smart-ass, Carter," Mr. Landry had barked, slapping a red marker across the board to erase Elijah's correction. "You're not here to teach. You're here to learn, if you can stop showing off long enough to do that." Laughter exploded around the room. One kid called him Professor Nobody, another mimicked his slow, thoughtful voice. Elijah didn't fight back. He never did. He just sat down, face burning, while the teacher moved on, leaving the incorrect equation untouched. No one cared that Elijah was right. They never did. Now, crouched on the sidewalk with rain soaking into his hoodie, Elijah recreated the equation perfectly, a second-order differential equation, simple to him, but apparently too complicated for a man with a degree to admit he was wrong about. Why did it matter so much? Because for Elijah, numbers never lied. People did. He hadn't always loved math. At least, not in the way other kids loved basketball or rap or sneakers. His love for numbers grew out of silence, those long hours in his grandma's apartment, the old wood creaking with every step, his father passed out in the next room, and no voice to guide him except the ticking of a clock and the patterns in the dust on the floor. By the time Elijah was 8, he could multiply triple digits in his head. By 10, he was teaching himself calculus from borrowed library books. But the smarter he got, the more isolated he became. Even the teachers started looking at him sideways, unsure whether to be impressed or suspicious. Because he didn't look like a math kid to them. He looked like trouble waiting to happen. But tonight, something felt different. He wasn't just writing out of frustration. He was writing to remember. To preserve. To prove something, not to the school, not to Mr. Landry, but to himself. A car rolled by, headlights splashing over the wall. Elijah paused, squinting against the glare. The driver didn't stop. No one ever did. Then he heard footsteps. Soft ones, cautious. "Elijah," a voice whispered. He turned and saw Jordan, a wiry kid with a backpack nearly as big as his body and a phone always glued to his hand. If Elijah was the math freak, Jordan was the hacker nerd. The only one who didn't laugh when Elijah solved things faster than the calculator. "You good, man?" Jordan asked, stepping closer, eyes scanning the chalk symbols like ancient glyphs. "What are you doing out here in the rain?" Elijah stood slowly, rubbing his wrist. "Fixing a mistake." Jordan tilted his head. "Yours?" "No. Landry's." Jordan chuckled. "Dude, why you still care? Everyone knows you're smarter than him." "That's not the point," Elijah muttered. "He made the whole class think I was wrong. And they believed him, just like they always do." Jordan sat on the curb, pulling a bag of chips from his jacket. "So, what, you gonna solve every problem this city throws at you?" Elijah didn't answer. His gaze drifted back to the wall, to the rows of white chalk that now looked like poetry only he could read. "I'm telling you, man," Jordan said, crunching loudly, "you should be posting this stuff online. There's like, forums, TikToks, even subreddits for math geniuses. Get famous. Get outta here." Elijah shook his head. "I'm not doing this for clout." "Then what?" The question hung in the air. For a second, Elijah thought of his grandma's voice. "Don't be afraid to shine, baby. But don't do it just so they'll look. Do it so they can see." He finally replied, almost to himself, "Because if I don't understand the world will eat me alive." Jordan went quiet, the only sound now the steady drizzle and the occasional hum of tires on wet pavement. Then Elijah pulled a folded, yellowed page from his notebook. "You ever seen this?" he asked. Jordan leaned forward, wiping rain off his glasses. The page was a photocopy of a journal article dated 1975. At the top, in bold, "Unsolvable. The Hypatia Sequence and the Algebraic Ghost, by Dr. Ernest L. Gaines." Jordan whistled. "That title sounds spooky." "It's a real math problem," Elijah said. "One of the hardest ever posed in American academic history. But no one talks about it." Jordan shrugged. "So?" Elijah's voice dropped. "Because the guy who wrote it, Dr. Gaines, was a black mathematician. From right here. South Side. Taught at a community college. He submitted his paper to 5 journals. All rejected. Then he died 2 years later. Never got recognition." Jordan's jaw tightened. "That's messed up. I found this last week at the library. Hidden behind old periodicals. It's like they wanted to bury it." Jordan looked at the sequence printed on the page. "A string of variables and modular functions, loops and logical paradoxes. And you think you can solve it?" "I don't know," Elijah admitted. "But I have to try." Jordan stared at him, eyes wide. "Bro. You fix that. You won't just be smart. You'll be legendary." Elijah folded the page again, placing it back in the notebook like a sacred artifact. "Then maybe," he said, eyes burning, "they'll stop laughing." As the rain slowed, Elijah packed up his things. The chalk marks began to dissolve under the water, vanishing like forgotten truths. But it didn't matter. The real formula was already in his mind, etched deeper than memory. He walked with Jordan in silence, turning corners through the misty city night. But something inside him had shifted. No longer just the outcast. No longer just the kid who loved numbers. Now, Elijah had a purpose. And a mystery to solve. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Before Elijah Carter ever solved an equation, before he ever picked up a piece of chalk or faced a classroom full of sneering kids, there was Grandma Clara. In the heart of South Side Chicago, tucked into the third-floor unit of a weary brick building that always smelled like fried onions and radiator steam, Elijah spent most of his childhood at her kitchen table. There were no math books on that table, not at first. Just bills, overdue notices, and grocery lists written in her cursive that tilted like a tired smile. But it was there, surrounded by the sounds of creaking floorboards, gospel radio, and the distant gunshots of a city that had forgotten how to be quiet, that Elijah first learned how to solve things. Because when Grandma Clara couldn't afford a calculator, she taught him how to count change by touch. When they didn't have cable, she turned multiplication drills into bedtime stories. 3 cats each have 4 kittens, she'd say, stirring a pot of beans. How many little paws we talkin'? 60, Elijah would answer without hesitation. Dang, she'd laugh, boy, you didn't even blink. He didn't blink because he loved it. Numbers were clean. Predictable. In a world that never seemed to make sense, numbers offered something he could hold on to. Something that never left when things got bad. And things did get bad. Elijah's mother, LaToya, had been brilliant too, top of her high school class, accepted to the University of Michigan on scholarship. But life, as it often did in their neighborhood, rerouted brilliance. She got pregnant at 19, dropped out to work double shifts at the nursing home, and passed away in a car crash when Elijah was 5. His father, Terrence, had been spiraling long before that, first pills, then bottles, then nothing but shadows behind closed doors. Clara took Elijah in without blinking. She raised him on her small pension, a bigger faith, and the belief that his brain was a gift the world couldn't afford to waste. But even she knew the cost of standing out too much. "Don't let em make you feel bad for being smart, baby," she'd say, holding his hand across the table. "But don't throw your light in their face neither. Let it shine steady, quiet. That's how they notice." In school, that was easier said than done. Elijah didn't fit the mold. He wasn't loud. Didn't play sports. Didn't hang out. He spent lunch breaks scribbling in the margins of used textbooks, not flirting or clowning or cutting class. The other kids called him Rain Man, the Count, Stephen Hawking Jr., sometimes, if they were especially cruel, Crack Baby Einstein. He tried to tune it out, but the words lodged in the back of his throat. He never told Grandma Clara the full extent of it. She already carried too many worries. The one person who didn't treat him like an alien was Jordan Taylor. They met in 6th grade when Elijah noticed Jordan bypassing the school's web filter with a Chrome extension he wrote himself. "Smart," Elijah said, genuinely impressed. "You like math?" Jordan asked. "Too much," Elijah replied. That was enough. From then on, they were an unlikely pair, Elijah with his notebooks full of theories and Jordan with his laptop full of scripts. They didn't hang out with anyone else, didn't need to. Jordan didn't understand most of Elijah's equations, and Elijah didn't get half of Jordan's code, but they respected the obsession in each other. Obsession. That's what it became. By age 16, Elijah had covered one entire wall of his tiny bedroom with taped-up pages, derivatives, functions, unsolved proofs, primes circled in red ink like blood drops. Every night, while his grandma watched reruns of Family Feud, Elijah sat at a folding desk in the corner, working problems in silence. The rhythmic scrape of his pencil was the soundtrack of his teenage years. One night, Clara stood in the doorway, her nightgown draped like a curtain around her slippers. She watched him without speaking, her eyes soft and proud. "You ever get tired of thinking so hard?" she asked. He looked up, surprised. "Doesn't feel like thinking." "Then what's it feel like?" "Like breathing." She nodded slowly. "Keep breathing, baby." That was the last full conversation they had before things started to change. Her health had been declining for a while. Quietly. Like everything else she did. She moved slower, coughed more, forgot small things. Elijah pretended not to notice, buried in his work. But the truth was starting to write itself, faster than any equation he could solve. The diagnosis came during winter break, congestive heart failure. She didn't cry. Didn't flinch. Just folded the paperwork, made some tea, and told Elijah it was all going to be fine. But he saw through the calm. He saw the oxygen tank that appeared beside the recliner. The way she started writing down passwords. The way she looked at him for a few seconds longer, like memorizing his face. That spring, she gave him the most important gift he'd ever receive, a faded leather-bound notebook, brittle and yellowed at the edges. "This belonged to your grandfather," she said, hands trembling as she passed it over. He was a numbers man, too. Never finished school, but he worked for a math professor for a while. Said the man was a genius. Said the world never gave him a fair shake. Elijah opened the notebook. Inside were pages of hand-scribbled formulas, strange annotations, cryptic doodles that looked like a mix of calculus and poetry. And at the very end, a name. Dr. Ernest L. Gaines. That was the first time Elijah ever heard of the man who would change the course of his life. He stared at the name, fingers tracing the faded ink. "He ever talk about him?" Elijah asked. "Not much," Clara replied. Said the man was working on something real important, something big. Then one day, he just disappeared. "What happened?" Clara shook her head. "Don't know, baby. Just said the world wasn't ready for a black man to be smarter than all of them. And they made sure he stayed forgotten." Elijah clutched the notebook like it was a lifeline. That night, he didn't work on any of his usual problems. He sat with the notebook, deciphering each page like a sacred text. And when he got to that final one, the formula written by Dr. Gaines, his chest tightened. There was something there. A structure. A loop. A language he almost recognized, but couldn't quite read. Not yet. A few weeks later, Clara's heart gave out in her sleep. The funeral was small. A few church ladies, the pastor, and Jordan, standing awkwardly in a button-up that didn't quite fit. Elijah didn't cry during the service. He couldn't. The grief was too sharp to come out in tears. But that night, back in the apartment, he pulled out the notebook and opened it to the last page. He set it on the kitchen table, the same one she used to write bills on, stir beans at, and quiz him about cat paws, and said aloud, "I'm gonna finish what he started." The room was quiet. But Elijah felt her presence, like warmth on his shoulder. He picked up a pen. And started to breathe. Elijah Carter knew 3 truths by the time he turned 17. 1. Numbers always told the truth. 2. People almost never did. 3. The farther you strayed from average, the more the world tried to snap you back. Kennedy High wasn't a place that celebrated minds like his. It was a place that crushed them under football schedules, hallway chaos, and teachers too tired or too jaded to care. The walls smelled like sweat, old textbooks, and cheap floor polish. The metal detectors at the front entrance reminded everyone that this wasn't a place to dream, it was a place to survive. Elijah wasn't surviving. He was enduring. Every day, he walked the same route to homeroom, head down, hoodie up, notebook clutched to his chest like armor. The hallways echoed with laughter, shouts, and the occasional slam of a locker door. Sometimes the jokes were quiet, whispers and chuckles behind his back. Other times, they were louder. "Yo, Einstein," one boy would call out, arms draped around his crew like royalty. "How many digits in, you a loser, huh?" "Don't waste your breath," another chimed in. "He speaks math, not English." Elijah never looked up. He'd learned early, attention was currency, and he wasn't rich enough to spend it. Still, the words cut. Because no matter how many times he told himself numbers were his refuge, it was hard to escape the truth, people didn't like what they didn't understand. Mr. Landry was the worst of them all. A middle-aged teacher with a permanent scowl and the kind of mustache that screamed tenure, he treated Elijah like a threat, not a student. He wasn't overt about it, no detentions, no outbursts, but his disapproval hung in the air like a bad odor. It started small. Skipping over Elijah's raised hand. Refusing to answer his questions. Calling on him only when he was sure Elijah wouldn't know the answer, which, to Landry's frustration, was rare. Then came the incident. It was a Thursday. The problem on the board was a basic trigonometric identity, easy for Elijah, who had solved harder ones at home in half the time. As Landry droned on, Elijah noticed something odd in the equation. A sign error. Subtle, but enough to change the solution completely. He raised his hand. Landry ignored him. He raised it higher. Finally, Landry sighed. "What is it, Carter?" Elijah stood. "The sign term should be negative. You distributed incorrectly." The class went quiet. Landry turned, checked the board, and instead of acknowledging the mistake, narrowed his eyes. "Are you the teacher now?" "No, sir." "But the equation." "Sit down." Elijah hesitated. "I said sit down." The laughter started again, soft, then growing. Someone whispered, "Know-it-all," and another muttered, "Teacher's pet turned teacher." Elijah sat down, face burning, heart racing. He didn't speak for the rest of class. He didn't need to. The silence spoke volumes. Jordan met him outside after the bell. "That was brutal," he said, unwrapping a bag of Skittles like it was no big deal. Landry's an insecure prick. Elijah shrugged, staring off toward the school gate. He knew I was right. He just didn't care. Jordan nodded. Yeah. 'Cause if he admits it, then he's not the smartest guy in the room anymore. They walked home in silence, their sneakers hitting pavement in sync. Southside afternoons had a strange rhythm, sirens in the distance, buses hissing at corners, the occasional shout of a street vendor trying to move knockoff colognes. Life kept moving, even when you felt stuck. Later that night, Elijah sat in his bedroom, notebook open, pencil spinning between his fingers. His mind drifted back to Landry's equation. The wrong sign. The refusal to acknowledge it. The laughter. He flipped past his own notes and stared at the old notebook, his grandfather's relic, passed down from Clara like a sacred object. On its last page, the haunting riddle from Dr. Ernest L. Gaines. The Hypatia sequence and the algebraic ghost. Elijah didn't know exactly what it meant yet. But he knew it mattered. He scanned the symbols again, nested expressions, alternating variables, a recursive pattern that defied basic simplification. His fingers trembled slightly as he underlined a particular line. If x grows irrational, let n follow. But if both resolve, ask why they began. What kind of math was this? It wasn't just an equation. It was a message. Who writes a math problem in riddles? Someone who didn't want just anyone to solve it. Someone who wanted only the right mind to see its truth. He leaned back in his chair, mind spinning. The next day, he went to the school library during lunch, skipping the usual jeers and empty tables in the cafeteria. The librarian, Ms. Delgado, barely glanced up, she'd long since accepted Elijah as a fixture in her domain. He searched the academic database terminals for anything on Dr. Ernest L. Gaines. Nothing. Not in the school's system. Not in the public education network. Even Wikipedia had only a stub, a birth date, a mention of a minor teaching post at Kennedy Community College, and an abrupt end. No published papers. No academic citations. No obituary. It was like he'd been erased. Why? Elijah narrowed his search and found a 1975 mathematics journal digitized in a university archive out of state. It contained a brief mention of Gaines' paper. Rejected for lack of formal rigor. That was it. One line. One man. Forgotten. Until now. Elijah copied everything. Downloaded what he could. Printed the references. He felt a slow, building fire in his chest, not anger, but something heavier. Something righteous. They buried this. He wasn't going to let it stay buried. After school, he met up with Jordan again, this time at the corner bodega where they sometimes used the Wi-Fi to run coding experiments or stream tech videos. Jordan raised an eyebrow when Elijah dumped a stack of papers onto the table between the expired candy shelf and the broken ATM. Are we building a math nuke? No, Elijah said, dead serious. We're bringing someone back to life. Jordan flipped through the notes. Who the hell is Ernest L. Gaines? Elijah told him, about the notebook, the riddled sequence, the rejection, the disappearance. Jordan listened, nodding slowly. So this guy got blackballed by the math world? Worse, Elijah said. He got erased. They didn't just ignore his work, they pretended he never existed. Jordan leaned back. Damn. That's some conspiracy-level stuff. It's not a conspiracy if it's real. Jordan smirked. So what now? Elijah stared at the papers, the lines of logic and chaos stitched together like a code only he could feel pulsing behind the symbols. Now, he said quietly, we solve it. That night, as the city rumbled around him and the weight of Clara's notebook pressed against his desk, Elijah made a choice. He wasn't going to fight Mr. Landry. He wasn't going to argue with classmates. He was going to solve the unsolvable. And when he did, they wouldn't just see a math freak. They'd see the ghost of a genius rise from the margins. And realize it had been speaking through him all along. The problem Elijah had inherited from Dr. Ernest L. Gaines wasn't like the ones he'd solved in class. It wasn't neatly written in textbooks, it wasn't simple, and it wasn't designed for the faint of heart. This problem wasn't just an equation, it was a riddle that refused to die. For days, Elijah sat in his room, papers scattered around him like confetti. He didn't even look at his homework anymore, not that it mattered. He'd long since stopped caring about the trivial problems his teachers gave out. This was bigger. This was history. Or, at least, it could be. The Hypatia sequence was the name given to the problem, but its true meaning had been obscured by layers of theory, speculation, and silence. Dr. Gaines, it seemed, had been trying to prove something fundamental, a mathematical mystery that had stumped the greatest minds of his time. Something involving irrational numbers, recursive functions, and patterns that defied logic. Elijah wasn't sure exactly what it was yet, but he knew he was close. He could feel it. The more he stared at the equation, the more it spoke to him, not in words, but in movement. Like watching a clock ticking and knowing something was about to happen. He opened the notebook to the last page, the page with the formula, and traced his finger along the lines of symbols. The Hypatia sequence. His breath caught as he ran his eyes over the symbols again. There was something about the way the numbers and variables interacted, a hidden symmetry that he couldn't yet articulate. But it was there. The next morning at school, Elijah arrived early, as he always did, to get some quiet time before the chaos of the day. Jordan met him in the hallway, his headphones already dangling around his neck. He had a half-eaten burrito in one hand, and a beat-up notebook in the other. "Didn't think you'd be here this early," Jordan said, a grin creeping across his face. "You okay?" Elijah didn't look up as he fiddled with a small calculator in his hands. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just, working on something." "Right. You've been working on something for the past 3 days straight. What's going on? Got another mystery, Sherlock?" Elijah shot him a glance. "You wouldn't get it." Jordan raised an eyebrow. "Try me." Elijah hesitated for a moment, then let out a deep breath. "It's this problem. The Hypatia sequence." Jordan paused, setting his burrito down on a nearby ledge. "The one from your grandfather's notebook?" "Yeah. I'm trying to solve it." "You mean we're trying to solve it, right?" Elijah gave a small smile. "Yeah, sure. I guess you can help." Jordan nodded, pulling out his own notebook. "All right, let's get to work. What's the first part of this mess?" Elijah opened the notebook to the first page of the Hypatia sequence and pointed to a line near the top. "The first step is identifying the recursive pattern. If I'm right, it has to do with this part here," he said, tapping the equation with his pen. Jordan squinted at the formula. "Looks like, it's trying to define a sequence, but the exponents don't match up. They're all over the place." "Exactly. That's what's been bothering me. The exponents should form a regular pattern. There's something off about the way they're set up." Could it be a problem with the limit?" "I think so. But if that's the case, then it's not just a simple sequence problem, it's deeper than that. It's something fundamental." Jordan looked at him, his expression shifting from playful to serious. "Like, you think it's a real math problem, not just some random scribbles?" Elijah stared at the page for a long time. "I don't know yet. But I think Gaines was onto something. Something big." For the next few weeks, Elijah and Jordan worked together before and after school, poring over the Hypatia sequence. They couldn't make heads or tails of most of it. Every time they thought they were getting close, the formula would shift just enough to throw them off track. But each time they made a breakthrough, they'd find another wall, another layer to peel back. One Friday afternoon, Jordan dropped a bombshell. "Elijah, I think I found something. Elijah glanced up from his notebook, surprised by the urgency in his friend's voice. What do you mean? I was messing around with the recursive part of the equation. You know, the part that repeats. I started plugging in some values, and he trailed off as he flipped open his laptop, rapidly typing in numbers. A graph popped up on the screen, chaotic at first, but then, slowly, a pattern began to emerge. The numbers that had seemed random started to form a recognizable curve. Elijah's heart raced. Wait a minute, are you saying this is? Look at the graph, Jordan interrupted. It's not random. It's a logarithmic spiral. Elijah stared at the screen. It was a subtle curve, almost imperceptible at first, but as more data points appeared, the spiral grew clearer. It was a famous pattern in mathematics, one that was seen in everything from galaxies to seashells. The Fibonacci sequence. This isn't just a math riddle, Elijah whispered. It's a pattern. Jordan nodded, looking just as stunned. Yeah. And this could be what Gaines was trying to show. The spiral isn't just about numbers. It's about the relationship between them. Elijah felt a thrill go through him. We're on the right track. The next week, as Elijah walked into Mr. Landry's class for the final period, something felt different. He wasn't the same quiet kid in the back anymore. The one who cringed at the thought of speaking up. The one who always let the taunts roll off his back. No. He was Elijah Carter, the kid who was going to solve an equation that had defeated the world's best minds. And he wasn't going to let anyone forget it. He sat down at his desk, pulled out his notebook, and began working through the next set of equations, not even bothering to glance at Landry. But when the bell rang and Landry called on him to answer a question, Elijah didn't hesitate. I think you made a mistake in the second step, he said, raising his hand. It's actually a logarithmic spiral, not an exponential function. The graph you showed is wrong. Landry glared at him, jaw clenched. Excuse me? The problem. The solution isn't what you think it is. It's a different kind of equation. A recursive one that forms a pattern, not just an isolated solution. The class went silent. Landry's eyes narrowed. And where did you get this insight from, Carter? Elijah looked him square in the eye. From someone who actually understood the numbers. That afternoon, after school, Elijah walked out of the building with his mind racing. He didn't care if Mr. Landry was angry. He didn't care if the class laughed. He knew one thing, he was on the verge of something monumental. And he wasn't going to stop until he cracked the code. Elijah couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was just beyond his reach, like a thread he was tugging at, slowly pulling it out, but every time he thought he was close, it slipped away. Yet, as the days wore on, the spiral, was starting to make sense. He'd spent the last week diving deeper into the sequence, with Jordan right there beside him. They were no longer just students working on an obscure problem, they were adventurers, exploring the landscape of numbers in a way that felt otherworldly. Each new insight led to more questions, more layers, more twists in the equation. But the spiral, that logarithmic pattern, was constant, a truth that kept emerging, just like the swirling galaxies in the cosmos. It was Friday again, and the air felt heavy with anticipation as Elijah entered the library. The usual buzzing hum of computers, the scent of books older than his parents, and the low murmur of students working in corners. They were all a comfort now, like his sanctuary. He knew he needed to make a breakthrough today. Jordan was already there, hunched over a stack of papers, scribbling furiously in his notebook. When Elijah approached, Jordan didn't even look up, already aware of his presence. I think I've got it, Jordan said, without preamble. Elijah's pulse quickened. Got what? Jordan pushed the papers toward him, his hand shaking slightly as he did. Elijah bent over, reading through the complex notes. Jordan had connected the recursive patterns to the Fibonacci spiral, but it didn't stop there. He had found a deeper link, something elusive. This isn't just a simple logarithmic function, Jordan explained, pointing to a new part of the formula Elijah hadn't noticed before. Look here, this variable z, the one that's been shifting, it's acting as a dynamic multiplier. It changes the growth rate depending on its relation to the rest of the sequence. Elijah frowned, processing the information. So, it's not just a fixed formula. It's, what? It's alive. Exactly, Jordan said, leaning back in his chair, grinning. This isn't just math. This is a self-modifying system. The sequence evolves based on its own previous terms. It's not static, it's interactive. Elijah leaned back too, staring at the paper for a long time, the hum of the library fading into the background. Self-modifying, that was the key. It was like a living organism, changing and adapting, growing in unpredictable ways, but still bound by certain rules. If we could just, Elijah began, his mind racing. Jordan interrupted him. I know. If we can find the right initial conditions, then we might be able to predict the next term with insane accuracy. But we need to solve this first. They spent the rest of the afternoon running simulations on Jordan's laptop, plugging in values and watching the spiral unfurl before their eyes. Numbers danced across the screen like constellations, and the further they went, the clearer the pattern became. But still, they hadn't cracked it completely. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the floor of the library, Elijah felt a deep ache in his chest. He wanted to finish it. He could feel the solution sitting just outside his grasp. Yet, there was something else, a nagging thought, a suspicion that perhaps the real answer wasn't hidden in the numbers at all. Perhaps, just like Dr. Gaines had tried to say, the riddle was a symbol of something deeper. Elijah, are you listening? Jordan's voice cut through his thoughts. What? Elijah blinked, shaking his head to focus. I think we've been looking at this the wrong way. What if the sequence isn't just about solving it, it's about understanding why it's so elusive? Elijah's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Jordan's eyes sparkled, his expression suddenly serious. What if Gaines wasn't trying to solve the sequence? What if he was using it to ask a question that couldn't be answered by numbers alone? Elijah froze. A question that couldn't be answered by numbers. Jordan leaned in. What if it's about something bigger? What if Gaines was trying to show that the nature of infinity, of irrational numbers, doesn't fit within the neat, rigid boundaries we try to put it in? What if he was making a statement about the limits of human understanding? Elijah felt a shiver run down his spine. The thought had never crossed his mind. He had always approached the problem as a math puzzle, an equation to be solved, a final answer to find. But what if the riddle itself was pointing at something else? Something beyond the numbers. He turned back to the equation, staring at it with new eyes. The symbols were no longer just a collection of numbers. They were questions. Questions about how math, and even life, could never truly be solved. There would always be something beyond, something that defied logic, something that couldn't be contained by mere calculations. The next day at school, Elijah couldn't get the thought out of his head. It was Saturday morning, but Kennedy High still felt alive. The halls were less crowded, but there were still a few stragglers hanging around. Elijah made his way to the back of the school, where the cracked basketball courts were hidden behind the gym. Jordan was already there, waiting by the bleachers, tapping on his phone. "What's up?" Jordan asked, as Elijah sat down beside him. "I don't know," Elijah said slowly. "I think we've been chasing the wrong thing." "Chasing the wrong thing? What are you talking about?" Elijah paused, thinking. What if the sequence itself isn't the answer? What if it's just a clue? What if Gaines was trying to teach us something bigger, something beyond numbers? Jordan stared at him. "You mean, like a life lesson?" "Not exactly," Elijah replied. "I mean, what if he was trying to show that some things can't be solved? Some things are meant to be left open, like an infinite series that keeps going. Maybe that's what he was getting at, the idea that there are limits to how much we can understand. And that's okay. Jordan blinked, clearly processing. So, you're saying that the Hypatia sequence isn't just a math problem. It's a philosophy. Exactly, Elijah said, a smile creeping onto his face. It's not about finding the answer. It's about accepting the question. Jordan rubbed his chin. Man, that's deep. Elijah felt something inside him shift, as if a weight had been lifted. The tension that had been gnawing at him for weeks, the pressure to solve it, to prove everyone wrong, to show that he was right, was gone. For the first time, he realized that maybe the whole point wasn't to solve the problem. Maybe the problem was never meant to be solved. The following Monday, when he walked into Mr. Landry's class, Elijah wasn't the same. He wasn't the quiet, unsure student who avoided confrontation. This time, he had a sense of clarity. He knew what he was capable of, and what he wasn't. Mr. Landry stood at the front of the room, reviewing the same material Elijah had long since mastered. When he saw Elijah come in, he raised an eyebrow. "Carter. I hope you're ready to participate today." Elijah nodded, his eyes steady. "Actually, Mr. Landry, I've been thinking a lot about math lately. About how numbers and patterns can show us something beyond the answer." Landry's frown deepened, but Elijah wasn't bothered. He'd already won. The answer wasn't in the equation, it was in the understanding. Elijah sat in the library, his fingers lightly grazing the edge of his notebook. The last few weeks had been a blur of discovery and self-reflection, a whirlwind that had left him dizzy yet more aware of himself than ever before. As he sifted through the pages of Dr. Gaines' notebook, one thought kept resurfacing: the Hypatia sequence wasn't just about numbers, it was about the spaces in between them. The gaps. The unknowns. The places where logic faltered and left room for something more. Something he couldn't quite put his finger on yet, but he knew it was there. Jordan had tried to convince him to stop. "Maybe it's enough for now," he had said, his face creased with concern. "You've cracked it. You solved the equation." But Elijah wasn't convinced. He had come too far to let the problem slip through his fingers now. There was more to this than just solving an equation. He could feel it. His eyes drifted over to the other side of the library, where a group of students were gathered around a table, laughing and scrolling through their phones. It was the usual scene, high school life at its most ordinary. But Elijah had changed. He was no longer just a student, quietly sitting in the back, afraid of being overlooked. He had learned that there were things beneath the surface, things waiting to be discovered, and those things had the power to change everything. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, but Elijah didn't move. Instead, he stared down at the notebook in front of him, his mind working over the last few months of discoveries. Something was nagging at him. Something about the way the sequence had unfolded. There was an underlying truth, a reason why Dr. Gaines had left it behind. The next day, Elijah woke up early, as usual, and went straight to his desk. He had barely slept the night before, restless with thoughts that refused to settle. He didn't care about the usual distractions, homework, tests, even the teasing that came from his classmates. Today, he was focused on something else. Something bigger. As he pulled open Dr. Gaines' old notebook again, he felt a sense of urgency that hadn't been there before. He needed to understand what was behind the Hypatia sequence. The answers were buried in the equations, but the real truth was hidden in the patterns. And the patterns, Elijah realized, were more than just numbers. They were a reflection of something deeper, of the way the world worked. Of the way people thought. The sequence wasn't just an equation. It was a mirror. He scribbled a few thoughts in his notebook, connecting ideas that had previously felt disjointed. His hand moved quickly, almost as if the pen was guiding him rather than the other way around. By the time he got to school, he was nearly vibrating with anticipation. He couldn't wait to share his latest insights with Jordan. They had been working together, but Elijah had a feeling that today would be different. Today, the pieces would come together. When he met Jordan in the courtyard before class, his friend raised an eyebrow at his energetic pace. "You look like you're about to launch a rocket or something." "I think I'm about to solve the puzzle," Elijah said, his voice low, almost reverent. Jordan chuckled. "You've been saying that for weeks. What makes today different?" Elijah leaned in, lowering his voice so only Jordan could hear. "I think I understand the true nature of the Hypatia sequence now. It's not just a formula. It's a commentary on the way we see the world. The way we try to put everything into neat little boxes, but the world won't fit in those boxes. The sequence isn't about finding a solution. It's about understanding the limits of solutions." Jordan blinked, clearly processing the shift in Elijah's tone. "Okay, that's heavy. But how does that help us solve the problem?" "It's not about solving it, Jordan. It's about embracing the fact that some things can't be solved. Some things don't have a neat answer." Gaines wasn't trying to finish the puzzle. He was trying to show us that there's beauty in the mystery. The bell rang, and the two of them moved to their respective classes. Elijah couldn't focus during the lesson. Every time he tried to write down a note or pay attention to Mr. Landry's lecture on linear equations, his mind drifted back to the sequence. It was almost as if the numbers had taken on a life of their own, swirling around in his mind like a storm he couldn't escape. That afternoon, he found himself back at the library, this time alone. The quiet hum of the fluorescent lights above him was the only sound as he pulled up the Hypatia sequence on his laptop. He was deep in thought when his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Jordan. "Elijah, I think you're onto something. But what do you think it all means? How does this fit into the bigger picture?" Elijah's fingers hovered over the keyboard as he read the message. He thought for a moment, then began typing his response. "I think it means that we can't always control everything. That there's an element of chaos in math, in life, that we can't predict or control. The Hypatia sequence is a symbol of that. We try to make things predictable, but the universe doesn't work that way." He hit send and leaned back in his chair, staring at the equation on the screen once again. For the first time, the numbers didn't seem like a puzzle to be cracked, but rather a story to be understood. As the days passed, Elijah spent more and more time exploring this new interpretation of the Hypatia sequence. His classmates noticed the change in him. He wasn't the quiet, reserved kid anymore. He had become someone different, someone who had stepped outside the bounds of traditional thought and embraced the unknown. And while he still worked hard on the sequence, he no longer felt the pressure to solve it. Instead, he felt the joy of discovery, of learning, of questioning. Even Mr. Landry couldn't ignore the shift. One afternoon, after class, he stopped Elijah as he was packing up his things. "Elijah," Mr. Landry said, his voice unusually soft. "I've been noticing you lately. You've been thinking differently. You're not just solving problems anymore. You're questioning them. That's something rare, something powerful." Elijah didn't know how to respond. He had never expected praise from Mr. Landry, who was often quick to dismiss his enthusiasm for the unconventional. Instead, he simply nodded. "I guess I'm learning to think outside the box," Elijah said quietly. By the end of the week, Elijah had decided to approach the Hypatia sequence from yet another angle. He had been working with the equation, running different models and simulations, but now, he was less concerned with the result and more focused on the process. The process, the constant iteration, the constant changing, that was the true nature of the sequence. The universe, Elijah realized, wasn't about finding perfect answers. It was about adapting, learning from mistakes, and growing. The true answer was hidden in the space between the numbers. It had been a week since Elijah's breakthrough, and yet the feeling of discovery still hummed through his veins like an electric current. His relationship with the Hypatia sequence had shifted. What had once been a mystery he was determined to solve had now become a riddle he was learning to embrace. The numbers no longer felt like enemies to be conquered but companions in a much larger journey. But there were moments, like tonight, when the silence of his thoughts was louder than any equation or number could ever be. Elijah sat in the quiet of his room, the dim light of his desk lamp casting long shadows across the floor. His laptop sat open in front of him, the sequence still on the screen, blinking back at him like a patient but demanding teacher. He had worked through the night before, but something was missing. The equation had many layers, yes, but it still felt incomplete. He hadn't figured out what the next step was. The problem, he realized, wasn't that the sequence was too complex, it was that it demanded silence in order to hear its true voice. Numbers were only part of the puzzle. There was a language in the silence, a rhythm in the pause that followed the numbers' dance. The question was, could Elijah hear it? The next day, as Elijah walked through the crowded hallways of Kennedy High, he felt the weight of all the eyes on him. Not directly. People weren't exactly watching him, but there was an undertow of curiosity. He had become something of a legend, whispered about in the corners of the school. The quiet kid who loved numbers. The kid who had solved the Hypatia sequence. At least, that's what they thought. But Elijah hadn't solved it, not in the way they imagined. He wasn't in the business of solving. He was in the business of understanding. And it had taken him days of solitude to realize that the silence, the empty spaces between the numbers, was where the real answer lay. He met Jordan at lunch as usual, though there was a palpable tension in the air. Jordan had been quieter than usual, as though the excitement of the past few weeks had worn him down. He sat across from Elijah, picking at his sandwich without much enthusiasm. "Are you okay?" Elijah asked, studying his friend's face. Jordan didn't meet his eyes immediately. "Yeah, I'm fine," he muttered. "Just thinking about the sequence." Elijah leaned in, his eyes lighting up. "You've been thinking about it too, huh?" Jordan nodded slowly. "I don't know, man. The more I think about it, the less sense it makes. It's like there's this whole other layer we're missing. And it's messing with my head." Elijah paused, sensing that Jordan was struggling to articulate something important. "What do you mean?" Jordan let out a heavy sigh. "It's like, every time I think we're getting closer to solving it, it feels like we're just digging deeper into a hole. The more we learn, the more I realize we don't know. And the worst part? I don't know if I care anymore about finding the answer. I just want to understand why it's been sitting there for 50 years. Elijah's heart skipped. This wasn't just about the sequence anymore. This was about understanding something larger, something that had been beyond both of them. He reached across the table, placing a hand on Jordan's. "That's the point," Elijah said softly, his voice low. "It's not about the answer. It's about what the sequence represents. The truth behind it." Jordan's eyes flickered with confusion. "The truth?" Elijah nodded. "What if the sequence is about the silence? The gaps. The places where we can't find answers. Maybe Dr. Gaines left it there because he knew no one could solve it. Not because they didn't have the tools or the intellect, but because there are some things that don't have answers." Jordan blinked, then slowly began to nod. "I get it now. It's not just math. It's philosophy. It's about the limitations of knowledge itself." Elijah smiled, feeling a strange weight lift from his chest. He hadn't realized just how much of his own journey had been about proving something to others, to show that he wasn't just another kid in the back of the class. But now, he understood that the true answer wasn't for anyone else. It was for him. After school, Elijah didn't head straight home. Instead, he went to the one place he knew he could think clearly, the old basketball courts behind the gym. The ones no one ever used anymore, where the paint on the court was faded and cracked, and the metal hoops groaned under the weight of time. As Elijah walked out there, he took a deep breath, letting the cool spring air fill his lungs. The quiet felt different here. Not oppressive like in the library, but open, expansive, as though the world itself was waiting for him to understand something. He sat on the bleachers, pulling out his notebook and flipping through the pages. The sequence was still there, scribbled in his hastily written scrawl. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. "Hey, Elijah." Elijah turned, seeing Jordan walking up the stairs to join him. "Didn't expect to find you here," Jordan said, sitting next to him. "I thought you'd be buried in numbers again." Elijah smiled, a genuine smile this time. "Numbers are still there. But I'm realizing that sometimes, you just have to sit with the silence." Jordan raised an eyebrow. "The silence?" "Yeah," Elijah said, looking out at the empty court. "It's in the quiet moments between the action, the pauses between the shots. The time when nothing is happening, but everything is actually unfolding. That's what the sequence is trying to show us. It's not just about finding the right answer. It's about being okay with the things that can't be answered." Jordan was quiet for a long time, staring out at the fading daylight. Finally, he spoke. "You know, I think I'm starting to understand," he said. "It's not about solving it, it's about living with it. With the unknown." Elijah nodded. "Exactly. That's the real answer." That night, as Elijah lay in bed, the glow of his phone illuminating his face, he received a text from Jordan. "I think we're on to something. I'm ready to stop looking for the answer and start looking at the question. We'll figure this out together. Let's keep digging." Elijah smiled, feeling the weight of those words settle in his chest. He wasn't alone in this journey anymore. They were in it together, pursuing understanding, not the answer. And in that moment, Elijah understood something crucial: the sequence had never been about solving a math problem. It had been about learning to live with the questions, to embrace the spaces between, to accept that silence had its own kind of wisdom. It was late on a Friday evening, and the small flickering light of Elijah's desk lamp cast long shadows across his bedroom walls. The clutter of textbooks, scribbled notes, and scattered coffee cups had become an almost permanent fixture in the room. Yet tonight, Elijah was no longer focused on the usual rush of trying to solve problems or fill in gaps. Instead, he was piecing together something much more intangible: the idea of time. The Hypatia sequence had evolved in his mind from a mathematical conundrum into a philosophical meditation. He had moved from searching for a neat solution to realizing that the true value of the sequence lay in understanding its complexities and contradictions. And now, it was time to confront another layer of the puzzle: time itself. Elijah paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard as he stared at the flashing numbers on the screen. What if the sequence didn't just live within the limits of known mathematics? What if it existed within time itself? The idea felt almost absurd, yet somehow perfect. The sequence had been untouched for 50 years, an enigma lying dormant in the pages of Dr. Gaines' notes, awaiting someone with the right mindset to unearth it. What if that was the key? The sequence, like time, had no beginning and no end, it just was. And yet, in its endless flow, there had to be patterns. There had to be something that linked it all together. He reached for his notebook and began writing down the equation again, the familiar symbols taking shape on the page. But this time, he didn't focus on solving it. Instead, he traced the flow of the numbers, tracing them back and forth, watching how they shifted as they moved through space and time. Saturday morning arrived, and Elijah felt the weight of the past few weeks bearing down on him. His understanding of the sequence was no longer about intellectual achievement. It was about living with it, accepting the uncertainty, and letting the math reveal itself in pieces. And those pieces, those gaps, told a story that was slowly unfolding in his mind. He pulled on his hoodie and grabbed his backpack, heading out of his house to meet Jordan at the library. His friend had texted him earlier, saying that he'd been thinking about the sequence too, and wanted to discuss it. Elijah had no idea what Jordan had come up with, but he knew it was time to move beyond just the theory. It was time to put their thoughts together and see where this path led. As he walked into the library, he spotted Jordan sitting at their usual table, a stack of books spread out in front of him. Jordan looked up as Elijah approached, his face lit with a kind of quiet determination. "You've been thinking about it again," Elijah said, pulling out a chair and sitting down. Jordan nodded slowly. "Yeah, I couldn't stop. There's something about this sequence. The more I try to break it down, the more I think it has to do with something bigger than just math." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "Bigger than math? What do you mean?" Jordan leaned forward, tapping his fingers on the table as he spoke. "What if the sequence represents time itself? Like, what if the way we look at the equation is all wrong? We keep trying to simplify it, to make it linear, but time isn't linear. It's chaotic. It bends. It loops. It's not about moving from point A to point B. It's about how everything connects." Elijah's eyes widened. "That's what I've been thinking about too. The numbers, they're like a snapshot, a moment frozen in time, but when you look at them in context, they shift. They change. They don't stay the same." Jordan grinned. "Exactly. The sequence is a representation of time, a model of how things don't just move in one direction but shift and overlap. And maybe, just maybe, it's also showing us that we can't understand time in the same way we understand other problems. We have to think of it as a fluid, dynamic force. And so should we." Elijah couldn't help but smile. "That's it. We're not solving it. We're understanding it." For a long moment, both of them sat in silence, processing the enormity of what they had just realized. The sequence wasn't just a riddle to be solved, it was a meditation on existence itself. Time, life, growth, they all flowed and ebbed, shifting with every moment. The sound of pages flipping interrupted the silence, and Elijah glanced up to see Mrs. Foster, the librarian, walking over to them. She smiled warmly, but there was something in her gaze that seemed to hold an unspoken understanding. "You two seem deep in thought," she said, sitting down across from them. "I overheard a little of your conversation. You know, there's a saying I love, time is not the enemy. It's the canvas upon which we paint our lives." Elijah blinked, surprised by her words. "That's, actually a really great way to put it." Mrs. Foster smiled knowingly. "Well, sometimes, when you're too focused on solving something, you miss the beauty of what's already there. The sequence you're working on, it's beautiful, Elijah. It's a work of art in its own right. But sometimes, the answers aren't in the numbers. They're in the spaces between." Elijah and Jordan exchanged glances, both feeling a weight lift off their shoulders. This wasn't just a mathematical puzzle. It was an invitation to think differently, to approach the world with a sense of wonder rather than just logic. That evening, Elijah sat on the porch of his house, his notebook open on his lap. The sky above him was a dusky blue, the air cool with the remnants of the setting sun. He couldn't shake the feeling that time itself was shifting beneath him, and the sequence was simply reflecting that change. As he gazed at the stars, he thought about Dr. Gaines. The man had spent his entire career searching for the truth, only to leave behind a sequence that seemed impossible to solve. But Elijah was beginning to understand. The sequence wasn't something to be solved, it was something to be experienced. It was about embracing the uncertainty and the chaos, and seeing beauty in the imperfections. The stars above twinkled, distant and eternal, and Elijah realized that maybe that was all time was, moments that flicker in and out of existence, each one a piece of a much larger, unanswerable equation. That night, for the first time in weeks, Elijah went to bed without thinking about the sequence. It wasn't that he had forgotten about it, but he had accepted something more profound, that some answers were not meant to be found, but lived. He would continue to explore the sequence, yes. But for now, he was content to let time unfold as it would. Elijah sat in the dimly lit corner of the coffee shop, the rhythmic clatter of keys and hushed conversations creating a familiar soundtrack. He had grown used to the background noise over the past few weeks, the hum of life surrounding him as he worked on the Hypatia sequence. But today, something felt different. There was a pressure in the air, like the invisible forces of the world were leaning in closer, watching him, waiting for him to discover something. Jordan had been quieter lately, more distant. He showed up at school with his usual quick smile, but there was a hidden anxiety behind his eyes. Elijah had tried to talk to him, but Jordan always seemed distracted, as though the weight of the sequence was becoming too much to bear. Elijah shifted in his seat, running a hand through his hair. He stared at his laptop screen, but the numbers on the page no longer seemed to hold the same clarity. They had grown more complex, more elusive. The sequence was alive, shifting like a living thing, and the deeper Elijah delved into it, the more he realized that it wasn't just mathematics he was dealing with, it was something far more abstract. He couldn't explain it, but there were moments, fleeting as they were, when he felt as though the sequence wasn't just a code to be cracked. It was a map of something greater, something that existed beneath the surface of everyday life. A sense of an unseen force guiding his every move, pulling him deeper into the mystery. Elijah hadn't told Jordan about the strange dreams. Dreams where he was standing at the edge of a vast ocean, the waves crashing against the shore. In the distance, a figure stood, just out of reach, its features obscured by the mist. The figure seemed to beckon to him, but no matter how hard he tried to reach it, the distance between them remained unbridgeable. There was something about those dreams that felt familiar, like they were pulling from the depths of his subconscious. But no matter how many times he tried to analyze them, to tie them to the sequence, he couldn't make the connection. Elijah closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. It was as if something inside him, the essence of the sequence itself, was calling him to step away from the numbers for a moment. To look beyond what could be seen with the eye, to listen to what couldn't be heard. It was the silence again. Later that afternoon, after school, Elijah met Jordan at the park. The autumn leaves swirled around them, the crisp air biting at their skin. Jordan was sitting on the swings, his feet kicking lazily against the ground, his eyes lost in thought. "Elijah, I'm not sure I can do this anymore," Jordan said quietly, his voice a mixture of frustration and fear. "The deeper we get into this, the more I feel like we're chasing shadows. It's like the sequence is toying with us. The more we understand, the less we actually know. It's like an endless loop." Elijah sat down on the swing next to him, feeling the weight of his friend's words settle over him. "I know what you mean," he said softly. "But maybe that's the point. Maybe it's not about solving it. Maybe we're not supposed to have all the answers. Maybe it's about letting go of the need for control." Jordan turned to look at him, his expression a mixture of doubt and curiosity. "What do you mean? How can we just let go? We've come this far." Elijah paused, considering his words. What if the sequence isn't meant to be solved? What if it's trying to show us something about ourselves? About the way we approach problems? Maybe the real question is how we handle uncertainty. How we deal with the parts of life that don't have clear answers. Jordan shook his head, clearly unconvinced. "That's all well and good, but we're so close, Elijah. I can feel it. We can't just back off now." Elijah smiled faintly. "We're not backing off. We're just looking at it from a different angle. There's something deeper here, something beyond the numbers." Jordan was silent for a long time, and Elijah could tell he was wrestling with the same doubts. The truth was, they had both become so obsessed with the sequence, so consumed by it, that it had started to define everything they did. But now, Elijah was beginning to wonder if they had been too focused on the equation itself and not enough on the meaning behind it. That night, Elijah lay awake in bed, the thoughts swirling in his mind like the wind outside. What if there was something more to the sequence than numbers? What if it was about the connection between things, the unseen forces that held the world together? As he stared up at the ceiling, he remembered something Dr. Gaines had written in his journal: "In every pattern, there is chaos. In every chaos, there is a pattern." Elijah had thought it was just a metaphor, a poetic way of describing the unpredictability of the universe. But now, in the quiet of his room, he realized that it was more than that. The sequence wasn't just about math. It was about the balance between order and disorder, the interplay of forces that governed both the universe and the human experience. What if the sequence was a reflection of the chaos within? The push and pull between the seen and the unseen forces of life. The idea left him unsettled, but also strangely invigorated. The sequence wasn't just a puzzle to be solved, it was a doorway to something much bigger. A doorway that led to a deeper understanding of the world, of time, of his place within it. The next day, Elijah went to school with a renewed sense of purpose. He met Jordan before first period, and there was a noticeable change in the way they interacted. They weren't just two friends trying to crack a code anymore. They were explorers, venturing into the unknown, guided not just by logic but by the forces that existed beyond their understanding. "Have you thought more about what we talked about last night?" Elijah asked as they walked down the hallway. Jordan nodded slowly. "I have. And I think you're right. Maybe it's not about solving the sequence, but understanding what it represents. It's like it's showing us that there's more to life than just answers." Elijah smiled. "Exactly. It's about accepting the unknown." As they reached their lockers, Elijah's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out to find a message from Mrs. Foster, the librarian. "Elijah, I think I may have found something that could help you with your work on the sequence. Come by the library after school." Elijah's heart skipped. Mrs. Foster had always been a quiet observer, but her insight had proven invaluable in the past. What had she found? "I'll meet you at the library after school," Elijah said to Jordan. "We might be getting closer." Jordan gave a small nod, but Elijah could tell he was still processing the enormity of their conversation. There was a sense of something coming, a revelation, a breakthrough, or perhaps another layer of the mystery waiting to be uncovered. But for now, Elijah wasn't focused on solving the puzzle. He was focused on the unseen forces, the ones that had been quietly guiding him all along. The library was quiet as Elijah stepped inside, the soft rustling of pages and the faint hum of fluorescent lights the only sounds. He was used to the silence here, used to the feeling of being surrounded by knowledge that had been collected over decades. But today, it felt different. The air was charged with anticipation, a strange tension in the atmosphere. Mrs. Foster was standing behind the front desk, her glasses perched on the end of her nose as she flipped through a thick, leather-bound book. She looked up when she saw Elijah and gave him a knowing smile. "I've been expecting you," she said, motioning for him to come over. Elijah walked toward her, his curiosity piqued. "What did you find?" he asked, unable to hide the excitement in his voice. Mrs. Foster closed the book with a soft thud and slid it toward him. "This," she said, her voice low and careful. "This could be the key to unlocking the rest of the sequence." Elijah's fingers hovered over the cover. It was an old book, the edges of the pages yellowed with age. The title was barely legible, the letters worn from years of handling. He lifted it carefully, feeling a sense of reverence for the history it represented. "What is this?" Mrs. Foster smiled again, her eyes twinkling. "It's a journal. A collection of notes from a mathematician who worked closely with Dr. Gaines, back when the Hypatia sequence was first discovered." Elijah's heart raced. "You're telling me this is related to Dr. Gaines?" Mrs. Foster nodded. "Indeed. I found it hidden in the back of one of the archives. It was buried for years, likely overlooked. But I have a feeling it's important." Elijah's fingers trembled as he opened the journal. The pages were filled with dense calculations, observations, and cryptic notes. It was written in a language of mathematics that was familiar to him, but there was something else there too, something deeper, almost philosophical. He turned to the first page, where the writer had scrawled a message in faded ink. "The sequence is not just a riddle, it is a reflection of the universe. The answers are not in the numbers, but in the connections. In the patterns we cannot see. Elijah's breath caught in his throat. The word seemed to resonate with him, echoing everything he had been feeling lately. This wasn't just about solving an equation. It was about understanding the underlying connections that governed everything: time, space, and existence itself. He flipped through the pages, absorbing the notes. There were diagrams, each more complex than the last, and mathematical theories that seemed to hint at something beyond the sequence. Elijah's mind raced as he realized that the sequence was never meant to be solved by brute force. It was meant to be understood, to be explored from every angle. Mrs. Foster watched him intently, her expression unreadable. "What do you think?" she asked, her voice soft. Elijah looked up from the journal, his eyes wide with realization. This is it. This is the path forward. Later that evening, Elijah sat at his desk, the journal open before him, its pages covered in equations and notes that seemed to stretch on forever. He felt as though he had uncovered a hidden door, a passage that would lead him into uncharted territory. The sequence wasn't just a math problem, it was a doorway to something much larger, a way of understanding the world in ways he had never imagined. His thoughts turned to Jordan. He needed to show his friend what he had found. They had been working together for so long, and now it felt like they were standing on the edge of something monumental. But Elijah knew that not everyone would understand the gravity of what they were dealing with. There was a certain danger in uncovering truths that weren't meant to be known. The more they uncovered, the more they risked losing themselves in the process. He shook his head, trying to push the doubts aside. There was no turning back now. The path had been laid before him, and it was up to him to follow it. The next day at school, Elijah found Jordan sitting alone at their usual spot in the library. His friend's face was tired, his eyes shadowed by a lack of sleep. Elijah had noticed the change in him over the past few weeks, the growing sense of unease that seemed to hang over him like a cloud. "Hey, you okay?" Elijah asked as he sat down next to him. Jordan glanced up, his face unreadable. "I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about the sequence, and I'm starting to feel like we're in too deep. It's like we've crossed a line, and now we're not sure where we're going." Elijah hesitated, then slid the journal across the table. "I think I found something that might help us. Mrs. Foster gave me this. It's from someone who worked with Dr. Gaines. It's not just about the numbers. It's about the connections. The patterns." Jordan's eyes widened as he looked down at the journal, his fingers brushing the pages. This is incredible. I had no idea this even existed." Elijah nodded. "It's been hidden for years. But now that we have it, I think we're closer than ever." Jordan looked up, his expression torn. "But what does it mean? Are we really ready to dive deeper into this? What if we're uncovering something that's better left alone?" Elijah felt the weight of Jordan's words, but he couldn't shake the sense of destiny that had been pulling him forward. "I don't know where this will lead. But I think it's something we're supposed to understand. We've come this far, and now we can't stop." For a long moment, the two of them sat in silence, the weight of the decision hanging between them. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with unknowns. But there was no turning back. Elijah could feel it, this was the uncharted path, the one they were meant to walk, no matter the risks. That night, Elijah sat alone in his room, the journal open before him. He traced his finger along the lines of equations, the words in the margins echoing in his mind. There was a message here, hidden in the folds of the numbers and symbols. A message about the connections between all things. About time, space, and the forces that governed them. He couldn't explain it, but he knew that the sequence was more than just an intellectual puzzle. It was a key to understanding not only the mysteries of mathematics but the mysteries of life itself. Elijah closed the journal with a sigh. He wasn't sure where this path would take him, but one thing was certain, he was no longer just solving problems. He was uncovering truths. And those truths had the power to change everything. The following days felt like a blur. Elijah and Jordan met in the library every afternoon, poring over the journal Mrs. Foster had given him. The equations inside were unlike anything Elijah had encountered before, complex, almost surreal in their construction. It wasn't just the numbers, though. It was the way they seemed to have been written with a deeper intent, a purpose that wasn't immediately obvious. There was a hidden code beneath the surface, one that Elijah had only begun to grasp. What if we're looking at this all wrong? Jordan said one afternoon, running a hand through his hair in frustration. I mean, these numbers are crazy. It's like they were designed to be impossible to solve. Elijah nodded thoughtfully. But what if the numbers aren't the answer? What if they're the question? What if they're not meant to be solved in the way we think they should be? Jordan shot him a confused look. What do you mean? We have to figure them out, right? Elijah tapped the journal, his fingers brushing over the delicate pages. The numbers themselves are only a part of it. This whole sequence, there's something more. These aren't just isolated equations, they're patterns. And patterns, Jordan, they connect things. Maybe we're not supposed to break it down mathematically. Maybe we need to understand the relationship between the numbers. The way they interact, the way they influence each other. Jordan looked down at the journal, his brow furrowed. So, what are you saying? That we need to think about it differently? Yes, Elijah said. We need to look at it like a puzzle within a puzzle. It's all interconnected. There's a code hidden in the way these numbers link up. And it's not just about solving for X. It's about understanding the connections themselves. The next day, they met in the park after school, the crisp autumn air swirling around them. Elijah had brought a whiteboard and a marker, determined to map out the sequence in a way that might reveal a pattern they hadn't seen before. Jordan was skeptical, but he followed Elijah's lead, setting up the board and starting to write down the key equations they had been working with. It doesn't make sense, Jordan muttered. We've been trying for weeks to decode this thing, and we're still just spinning our wheels. Elijah stepped back from the board, scanning the equations. Something about the way they were arranged felt wrong. Not wrong in a way that made the equations invalid, but wrong in a way that suggested they were missing a crucial link. A connection. Suddenly, it hit him. His breath caught in his throat as the realization came rushing over him. He turned to Jordan, excitement building in his chest. What if the sequence isn't just linear? What if the numbers are part of a cyclical pattern? What if each number leads to the next, but only after completing a loop? Jordan looked at him, his eyes wide with confusion. What? You mean like a repeating cycle? Exactly. Elijah said, his voice rising. Like a code that resets itself. The equations don't follow a straightforward path, they keep coming back to themselves, but in a different form. It's like the numbers are reflecting something deeper, like a hidden language. Jordan seemed to process the idea, his expression shifting from confusion to cautious interest. Okay, I get it. But how do we prove it? How do we map this out? Elijah grabbed a nearby notebook, flipping it open to a blank page. He quickly sketched out a diagram, connecting the equations in a way that suggested a repeating cycle. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was a start. As he worked, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The next few hours were a blur of equations, diagrams, and theories. Elijah and Jordan worked side by side, connecting dots, making observations, and testing hypotheses. Slowly but surely, the cyclical nature of the sequence began to emerge. The numbers were not isolated events, they were parts of a larger whole, working together to form an intricate web of interconnections. As they worked, Elijah couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of something huge. They were no longer just solving math problems, they were unraveling a mystery that had been hidden for decades. A mystery that could change everything they thought they knew about the world. This is it, Elijah said, his voice barely above a whisper as he stepped back from the whiteboard. "We've got it." Jordan stood next to him, staring at the diagram they had created. "I can't believe it. This is unreal." They both stood there for a long moment, the enormity of their discovery settling over them. They had cracked the code, or at least, they had uncovered a key part of it. But the deeper question remained: what did it all mean? That evening, as Elijah lay in bed, his mind raced. The sequence wasn't just a mathematical puzzle anymore. It was a map, a blueprint of the world itself. A system of connections that extended beyond numbers and equations. A system that tied together the forces of the universe, time, space, and reality. But what was the point of this discovery? Was it just an academic exercise, or was there something more to it? Elijah's mind kept returning to the same question: what did Dr. Gaines know? What had he been trying to teach them? The answers were out there, hidden in the sequence, but he wasn't sure how to find them. He closed his eyes, trying to steady his thoughts, but the swirling patterns in his mind wouldn't let him rest. The deeper he dug into the Hypatia sequence, the more he realized that it was more than just math. It was philosophy. It was science. It was the very fabric of reality itself. And somewhere, hidden in that web of interconnected numbers, was the key to understanding everything. The question now wasn't just what the sequence meant, it was how far Elijah was willing to go to uncover the truth. The next day, at school, Elijah met Jordan in the hallway before first period. "I think we're on the right track," Elijah said, excitement creeping into his voice. "We've cracked the code. We just need to keep going, follow the pattern, and maybe, just maybe, we'll get to the end." Jordan nodded slowly. "I'm with you, Elijah. But I'm starting to think that the end might be closer than we think." Elijah paused, his heart skipping a beat. What did Jordan mean by that? Before he could ask, Jordan added, "I've been thinking about something. Maybe we're not supposed to solve the sequence. Maybe it's not about the answers, but the questions it raises. Maybe that's the real discovery." Elijah smiled. "You might be right. It's not just about the numbers. It's about understanding what they're trying to tell us." Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? It was a cold Friday afternoon when the knock on Elijah's door came. He wasn't expecting anyone, and his mind was too consumed with the Hypatia sequence to worry about much else. He'd spent the past few days obsessing over the patterns and cycles they'd uncovered, their significance growing more profound with each new discovery. The numbers were no longer just mathematical anomalies, they were a roadmap, one that led towards something bigger, something extraordinary. The knock echoed again, louder this time. Elijah hesitated before heading toward the door, wondering if it was Mrs. Foster or perhaps Jordan, eager to share another breakthrough. But when he opened the door, he found himself face to face with someone he had never seen before. A man stood on the doorstep, tall and broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair and a face weathered by time. His eyes were sharp, but there was a sadness to them, as if they had seen too much of the world's complexities. He wore a heavy coat, as though he had come from a long journey, and he held a worn leather briefcase in his hand. Elijah felt a chill run down his spine. Something about the man's presence seemed oddly familiar, though he couldn't place it. "Can I help you?" Elijah asked, trying to mask his confusion. The man studied him for a moment before speaking, his voice low and gravelly. "Elijah Walker, I presume?" Elijah's heart skipped a beat. "Yes, that's me. Who are you?" The man nodded, as if confirming a suspicion. "My name is Dr. Samuel Hayes. I'm an old colleague of Dr. Gaines." At the mention of Dr. Gaines, Elijah's mind instantly lit up. Dr. Gaines was the very reason they had been investigating the Hypatia sequence in the first place. A brilliant mathematician whose mysterious disappearance decades ago had left the world in a state of confusion. Elijah had been obsessed with the unanswered questions surrounding his life and work, and now here stood someone who claimed to have known him. "What do you know about Dr. Gaines?" Elijah asked, his voice tinged with both awe and skepticism. Dr. Hayes's eyes softened, and he glanced around as if making sure they were alone. "Not much anymore, I'm afraid. I've spent the last several years trying to track down the pieces of his work that have been lost, trying to understand what he was really working on. And, more importantly, why he disappeared." Elijah's pulse quickened. "You mean, you know something about the Hypatia sequence?" Dr. Hayes gave him a small, almost sad smile. "I know more than you might think. But I didn't come here to talk about that, not yet, anyway." Elijah frowned. "Then why are you here?" The man hesitated before continuing. "I came because I've been following your work, Elijah. I've seen what you've been uncovering, and I believe you've stumbled upon something far greater than you realize." Elijah's mind raced, his thoughts tumbling over each other. He had always thought his investigation into the sequence was a personal journey, something he and Jordan were unraveling on their own. But this was different. He felt as if the ground beneath him was shifting. "I don't understand," Elijah said, his voice barely above a whisper. "How do you know about me? How do you know about my work?" Dr. Hayes looked down at the briefcase in his hand and then back at Elijah. "Let's just say I've been keeping an eye on those who might be able to continue Dr. Gaines's legacy. And you, Elijah, you've shown an unusual aptitude for this work. For seeing the connections others can't." Elijah felt a strange mixture of pride and unease. He had always known he had a gift for mathematics, but hearing someone else acknowledge it in such a way made him wonder just how much attention his investigation had been drawing. Was he simply uncovering an old mystery, or was he walking into something far more dangerous? "Come inside," Elijah said, stepping aside to let Dr. Hayes enter. "We need to talk." They sat down at Elijah's kitchen table, the room filled with an unspoken tension. Elijah's mind was buzzing, the weight of the conversation heavy on his shoulders. Dr. Hayes placed his briefcase on the table and opened it, pulling out a few neatly organized folders and a stack of papers. "I've been looking for you for a long time, Elijah," Dr. Hayes said, his tone serious. "And I think you're ready to hear the truth about Dr. Gaines and the Hypatia sequence." Elijah's curiosity piqued. "What truth? What have you been hiding?" Dr. Hayes glanced at him, his eyes searching, as if measuring the right moment to reveal what had been kept hidden for so long. "The sequence is more than a mathematical enigma. It's a key. A key that unlocks a secret Dr. Gaines was trying to uncover before he disappeared." Elijah felt a sudden, intense sense of urgency. "What kind of secret?" Dr. Hayes leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The kind that could change everything we know about the universe." Dr. Gaines was not just trying to solve an equation, he was trying to understand the very fabric of reality itself. "The sequence, Elijah, it holds the key to unlocking the laws that govern time, space, and existence." Elijah's mind reeled. He had suspected there was something more to the sequence, but this? This was beyond anything he had imagined. "You mean, this isn't just about math? It's about everything?" Dr. Hayes nodded solemnly. "Exactly. But there's more. The sequence wasn't just a random collection of numbers. Dr. Gaines was convinced that it was a message, something encoded in the numbers themselves. A message that was left behind, hidden for those who were capable of decoding it." Elijah swallowed hard. The implications of what Dr. Hayes was saying were too much to grasp in a single moment. "And you think I can decode it?" "Dar." Hayes met his gaze with an intensity that made Elijah's stomach tighten. "I know you can. I've seen your work. You're close, Elijah. But there's a danger in what you're doing. You've got to be careful. If the wrong people find out what you're on the verge of discovering." Elijah felt the weight of Dr. Hayes's warning, but it only fueled his determination. He wasn't about to back down now. Not when he was so close. "We'll be careful," Elijah said, his voice steady. "But we're going to see this through." Dr. Hayes looked at him with a mixture of approval and concern. "I hope you're right. The world may not be ready for the truth." As Dr. Hayes left, Elijah stood at the door, his mind spinning with the revelation he had just heard. The sequence was more than just a puzzle, it was a gateway to understanding the universe itself. And now, he had a choice to make: would he continue down this path, uncovering the hidden codes of existence, or would he turn back before it was too late? But Elijah already knew the answer. There was no turning back. He was already too far in. The days that followed Dr. Hayes's visit were a blur of excitement and unease. Elijah had never felt the weight of something so significant resting on his shoulders. The Hypatia sequence was no longer just an academic puzzle, it was the key to something far greater. And with that knowledge came a responsibility Elijah wasn't sure he was ready for. He spent most of his time in the library, poring over the sequence, testing theories, and trying to decode the hidden layers Dr. Hayes had alluded to. He and Jordan were making more progress than ever, but with each new breakthrough, the stakes seemed to rise higher. It was as though they were on the edge of something monumental, but Elijah couldn't shake the feeling that they were also teetering on the brink of something dangerous. "Do you think we're ready for this?" Jordan asked one afternoon as they sat together in their usual spot at the library. His voice was low, his eyes flicking nervously to the papers scattered across the table. Elijah looked up from the equations he'd been scribbling, feeling a knot form in his stomach. "I don't know," he admitted. "Every time we think we've cracked a piece of it, something else comes up. It's like the more we understand, the more we realize there's so much we still don't know." Jordan ran a hand through his hair, clearly troubled. "I keep thinking about what Dr. Hayes said. About the dangers of this. If it's really that important, if it's tied to everything, time, space, reality, who else is looking for this? Who else knows about it?" Elijah's thoughts flashed back to Dr. Hayes's words: "The world may not be ready for the truth." That warning had been haunting him, but there had been no turning back since. They were already in too deep. "We've got to keep going," Elijah said firmly. "We're too close now. I can feel it." Jordan nodded slowly but still seemed uneasy. "Just promise me you'll be careful." "I will," Elijah said, though a part of him knew that it might already be too late for caution. Later that evening, Elijah sat at his desk, the glow of the desk lamp illuminating the pages in front of him. He had been working for hours, but his mind kept circling back to one particular part of the sequence, the anomaly. It was a small section, almost hidden within the larger pattern, but it felt important. Like a missing link between everything they had uncovered so far. He leaned closer to the paper, scribbling down equations, his thoughts racing. There was something about the way this anomaly connected with the rest of the sequence that made it feel like a key, a cipher that unlocked the next step. But what was it unlocking? And why did he feel like the closer he got to the truth, the more someone, or something, was watching him? A sudden knock on the door startled him. His heart skipped a beat as he quickly shoved the papers under a stack of books, but before he could stand up, the door creaked open. He hadn't heard anyone approaching. Elijah? It was his mother. She stepped inside, her face lined with concern. "Are you okay? You've been locked away in here for hours. Your dinner's getting cold." Elijah smiled weakly, trying to mask the growing tension in his chest. "I'm fine, Mom. Just working on some stuff." She raised an eyebrow. "What kind of stuff?" Elijah hesitated. He could tell she was worried, but he wasn't sure how to explain the magnitude of what he was dealing with. How could he tell her that the math he was studying could potentially change everything? "I'm just studying some old math problems. Nothing too big." His mother didn't look convinced, but she let it slide. "Well, if you're sure. But don't forget to eat. You can't think straight on an empty stomach." "I won't forget," he promised, though his thoughts were still miles away from dinner. After she left, Elijah felt a strange sense of isolation. He was on the brink of uncovering something that could alter the very fabric of reality, yet here he was, alone in his room, feeling the weight of that responsibility pressing down on him. He could no longer deny it, this was bigger than anything he had ever imagined. The next day, as Elijah walked into school, he felt a strange shift in the air. His usual routine seemed off. The sounds of students talking, laughing, and going about their day felt muffled, as though he was walking through a dream. It wasn't the school that felt different, it was him. The knowledge he had gained over the past few weeks had transformed his perspective. He met Jordan by the lockers between classes. "Do you feel that?" Elijah asked, his voice low. Jordan looked around, confused. "Feel what?" Elijah's eyes darted across the hallway, watching the students go about their business. "It's like something's off. Like the whole world is different now." Jordan seemed to register his unease. "It's probably just all the stress. You've been working non-stop on this. Maybe you just need a break." But Elijah wasn't convinced. There was something in the air, something that felt like it was about to snap. His eyes caught a figure across the hallway, someone standing just outside the entrance to the school, watching him. The figure was tall, dressed in dark clothing, and their face was partially obscured by a hood. Elijah's breath caught in his throat. The figure didn't move. They just stood there, staring at him. "Elijah? What's wrong?" Jordan asked, following his gaze. But when he looked back, the figure was gone. Elijah's heart raced, but he tried to push down the panic rising in his chest. It had to be a coincidence, right? It couldn't be connected to the sequence. But why did it feel like that person had been waiting for him? "I'm fine," Elijah said, forcing a smile. Just seeing things, I guess." Jordan didn't seem convinced, but he didn't press the issue. They headed to class, but Elijah couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was following them. That night, after school, Elijah went back to his room and immediately sat down with the sequence. He had to finish what he had started. The pieces were falling into place, and the weight of the mystery was bearing down on him harder than ever. But as he flipped through the journal, something caught his eye, something new. A piece of paper, wedged between the pages. Elijah pulled it out carefully, scanning it. It was a note, written in Dr. Gaines's hand. "The path to the answer is hidden in the pattern. It will find you when you are ready." A chill ran down Elijah's spine. What did this mean? Was it a message, or a warning? Before he could think any further, there was a loud knock on his window. The knock on Elijah's window came like a sudden crash in the middle of a silent night. His heart leapt into his throat, and for a moment, he couldn't move. It was the kind of knock that made your blood run cold, the kind of knock that signaled danger lurking just beyond the thin glass pane. He had been sitting at his desk, reading through the paper from Dr. Gaines, when it happened. His pulse was already racing, but now, the room felt suffocating, as though the air itself had thickened, closing in around him. The knock came again, louder this time. Elijah slowly turned toward the window, his breath shallow, as he moved to pull the blinds aside. His hand shook slightly. What he saw made his stomach drop. A figure stood outside, bathed in the dim light from the street lamp, casting long, jagged shadows against the ground. The person was tall, their form barely visible in the darkness. Elijah couldn't make out any details at first, but the silhouette was unmistakable. It was the same figure he had seen earlier at school. The figure had been watching him. Elijah's breath hitched. How had they found him here? He was careful, so careful to keep his investigation under wraps. So why was someone watching him, following him wherever he went? The figure didn't move. They just stood there, their eyes fixed on him. Panic began to rise in Elijah's chest, but he forced himself to take a steadying breath. His mind raced. What could this person want? Was it related to the sequence? Had his discovery been noticed by someone dangerous? He stepped back from the window, his thoughts spinning. He couldn't stay here any longer. Not with someone watching him like that. But then, just as quickly as the fear had risen, Elijah calmed himself. He couldn't let paranoia control him. He needed to think clearly. He checked the clock on his desk, late, almost midnight. There was no one he could call, no one who could help him right now. No one except Jordan. Elijah grabbed his phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed his friend's number. It rang 3 times before Jordan picked up. Elijah? What's going on? Jordan's voice was groggy, still half asleep. I need you to come over, Elijah said quickly, trying to keep his voice steady. Something's happening. I think I'm being followed. There was a long pause on the other end. Then Jordan's voice, now awake and alarmed, replied, What? Who is following you? I don't know, Elijah whispered, glancing back at the window. The figure was still standing there, unmoving. But I need you here. Now. I'm on my way, Jordan replied without hesitation. Don't do anything stupid. Just stay inside. Elijah hung up, his mind still racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was closing in around him. Whatever this was, it was no longer just about numbers or math, it was about his life. The figure outside had moved slightly, and Elijah's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't much of a movement, just a shift, as though the person had adjusted their stance. But it was enough to send Elijah's anxiety spiraling. He needed to get out. Elijah took a deep breath, grabbed his jacket, and went to the door. He was about to slip out and hide in the hallway when his phone buzzed again. It was a message from Dr. Hayes, You're not alone in this. They are watching you. Be careful. You're getting too close to something they don't want you to find. Elijah's blood ran cold. Who was they? And how did Dr. Hayes know what was happening to him right now? His fingers hovered over the screen, trying to decide what to do next. Before he could respond, there was a sudden, sharp knock on the door. A quick rap, like someone impatiently waiting for an answer. Elijah froze, his mind racing. Was it Jordan? He hadn't seen him arrive outside, but maybe he was just trying to stay out of sight. Then, the knocking came again. Louder. Urgent. This wasn't Jordan. Elijah stood still, listening carefully. His heart pounded in his chest. The knock was rhythmic, 3 rapid raps, then a brief pause, then 3 more. It was a pattern. A deliberate one. And as much as he hated to admit it, Elijah knew it wasn't random. This was connected to the mystery. He glanced at the window again. The figure was gone, but now a sense of dread gnawed at him. Whoever was knocking on his door knew something. They were involved in whatever Dr. Gaines had left behind. And they didn't want him to continue down this path. Elijah's thoughts flashed to the sequence, to the cryptic message from Dr. Gaines. The path to the answer is hidden in the pattern. It will find you when you are ready. Was this part of the pattern? Was this the moment everything would fall into place? He moved cautiously toward the door, but before he could touch the handle, the phone in his pocket buzzed again. This time, it was a call. He didn't recognize the number. But something about it felt urgent, like this was the last chance to stop whatever was happening. Elijah answered without hesitation. Hello. Elijah, it's Dr. Hayes. Listen to me carefully. His voice was sharp, filled with an intensity that sent chills down Elijah's spine. You're being followed. Don't open that door. Not to anyone. Elijah's hand tightened around the phone. What's going on? Who are these people? Whoever they are, they want you to stop. I've seen this before, Dr. Hayes continued. The sequence is a weapon in the wrong hands. If you keep going, you'll be a target. You need to get out of there. Now. Don't trust anyone. Before Elijah could respond, the line went dead. He stood there, stunned, holding the phone in silence. The weight of Dr. Hayes's words hung in the air. Don't trust anyone. Elijah's stomach churned. Was it too late to back out now? Was there any way to protect himself from whoever was out there? Then the door rattled. A sharp jolt shook the frame, and Elijah felt the rush of panic flood back in. His heart hammered in his chest. There was no more time to think. He had to move. A loud crash erupted outside, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, footsteps that were far too heavy, far too deliberate, to belong to someone who was simply walking by. Someone was coming for him. Elijah bolted from the door, his mind running on pure instinct. The room was small, the windows too obvious to escape through, and the hallway led directly into the open. But there was one place left. The old attic. He dashed for the stairs, hoping to make it before the door would give way. There was no turning back now. Whatever this was, it had just crossed a line. And Elijah wasn't going to let it stop him. Not when he was so close. The attic was cramped, suffocating, with an air of disuse that weighed heavily on Elijah as he climbed the narrow staircase. He had to get out of sight, his mind raced, thoughts jumbled, and panic clawed at his chest. He hadn't expected things to escalate so quickly. One moment, he was deciphering the Hypatia sequence, and the next, he was running for his life. The attic was the last place anyone would think to look. It was small, dusty, and filled with old boxes of forgotten memories, an entire world of things his family had left behind. There were no windows, only one dim light hanging from the center of the ceiling. The wooden beams overhead creaked ominously, as if warning him that the attic had its own secrets, secrets buried for years. Elijah didn't care. He was running from something far worse. He closed the attic door as quietly as possible and crouched behind a stack of cardboard boxes. His breath was ragged, each inhale feeling more strained than the last. His heart pounded in his chest. Outside, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway below, accompanied by muffled voices. They were getting closer. Whoever they weren't here to play games. Don't trust anyone, Dr. Hayes had warned him. But there was no one left to trust. The people in his life, his friends, his family, were the ones he needed to protect, and if he wasn't careful, he could endanger them all. Elijah's hand trembled as he pulled out his phone and typed a quick message to Jordan, "Stay away. Don't come here. I'm being followed." He hit send, then sat in the dark silence, listening intently. The footsteps stopped, but the voices kept coming. The creaking of the floorboards below was unmistakable. They were searching. They were close. His mind raced back to the sequence, to the message Dr. Hayes had sent him. Don't trust anyone. But Dr. Hayes had been the only one who had ever supported his obsession with numbers, the only one who had believed in the potential of the Hypatia sequence. Had he been warning Elijah about something more than just the people searching for the sequence? Had there been more to Dr. Hayes's cryptic words than he had first realized? Elijah couldn't be sure. But one thing was certain, he had to protect the work. If the sequence fell into the wrong hands, it could be the end of everything. And they were already too close to unlocking it. He swallowed hard, staring at the stack of boxes in front of him. His thoughts shifted back to the sequence, to the clue Dr. Gaines had left behind. He had to keep going. He couldn't stop now. As the footsteps grew louder, Elijah's eyes darted around the attic, searching for anything that could give him a way out, any secret passage, any escape. There had to be something. He knew this house better than anyone. He'd spent hours in the attic as a child, exploring the old relics and forgotten treasures that had been left behind. That's when he saw it. A small, unassuming wooden door was tucked away in the far corner, almost completely hidden by stacks of old furniture. He'd never noticed it before. It was barely visible, covered in dust, and blended in with the surrounding clutter. But Elijah could feel the pull, the instinct that told him this was his only chance. Without a second thought, he crawled toward it, careful not to make a sound. His heart was beating in his ears as he reached out and touched the door handle. It was old, worn, and cold to the touch, but when he twisted it, it creaked open with surprising ease. The door led into a narrow, dark passageway. A tunnel. A secret one. He stepped into the darkness, his breath catching in his throat. The air was damp and musty, but the tunnel was long enough to stretch deep into the ground. His mind raced. Why had he never known about this before? How long had this secret passage been here? It didn't matter. The sound of footsteps below was growing closer, too close for comfort. He had no choice. Elijah squeezed through the door and into the tunnel, shutting the door behind him as quietly as possible. The passage was tight, but manageable. It smelled of old wood and earth. The faint light from the attic barely illuminated the space around him. The only sound was the scuff of his shoes on the dirt floor as he moved forward, careful not to make too much noise. He had no idea where this tunnel led, but he knew one thing: it had to lead him away from whatever was chasing him. Elijah's thoughts flashed back to the sequence. The mystery wasn't just about numbers. It wasn't about finding the answer and claiming victory. The sequence was part of something much bigger, something older, darker. Whoever was following him now was after the truth, and they wouldn't stop until they had it. The same way he couldn't stop, no matter what it cost. The tunnel curved slightly, and Elijah quickened his pace, though he still had no idea where it would lead. Time was running out. He could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders, pressing down with every step he took. If he could just get away, just for long enough to think, maybe he could figure out his next move. Maybe then he could find the missing piece of the sequence that would make everything clear. At the end of the tunnel, Elijah saw the faintest glimmer of light. It was weak, distant, but it was enough. He moved toward it, his hands trembling as he reached the opening. He emerged into a small, forgotten room beneath the house. The walls were lined with shelves filled with old books and oddments, but what caught his attention was the small desk in the center of the room. On the desk lay a set of yellowed papers, handwritten documents covered in old equations. His pulse quickened as he stepped forward. This was it. The answers he had been searching for. The papers were a detailed continuation of the Hypatia sequence. His heart hammered in his chest as he began to sift through the papers, feeling the weight of each discovery sink deeper into his bones. But as he scanned the pages, something caught his eye, something that made his stomach twist with dread. The final line on the last page was written in a shaky hand. If you found this, it means they're already watching you. Trust no one. The sequence is not meant to be solved. A chill crawled up Elijah's spine. He wasn't alone. Whoever had written this knew the truth. And they weren't just watching. They were waiting. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from above, footsteps pounding the floor above the room. Elijah's heart dropped. They had found him. The moment of clarity was shattered, replaced by pure terror. There was no turning back now. Elijah's hand shook as he carefully folded the last page of the document. His mind raced, processing the warning: if you found this, it means they're already watching you. The footsteps above him pounded louder, each thud resonating in the walls, causing the room to shake with the impending danger. They had found him. The realization hit like a tidal wave: he was no longer just a researcher chasing a mathematical breakthrough. He had become part of a much larger, much darker game. His heart thudded in his chest. The documents were still clenched in his hand, but Elijah couldn't focus on them now. His thoughts were consumed by one question: who was chasing him? The tunnel entrance, his only means of escape, felt like miles away. Elijah's mind scrambled to formulate a plan. The warning from the unknown author was clear: trust no one. The very words he dismissed earlier were now burned into his memory. And now, as the walls seemed to close in on him, he realized how deep the danger ran. He glanced back at the door to the room, the sound of boots now reverberating beneath it. They were coming for him. There was no time to waste. His instincts kicked in, and Elijah sprang into action. He dashed for the far corner of the room, scanning for any possible way out. The stone walls were bare, save for the few shelves cluttered with old relics and books. But as he reached the corner, his foot hit something soft, an old carpet that covered a trapdoor. Elijah knelt down quickly, his breath ragged, and yanked at the door. It creaked under the pressure, and when it finally opened, he was met with a small set of stone stairs leading further down into the earth. The passage was narrow, almost claustrophobic, but it was his only chance. He didn't hesitate. With the papers clutched tightly in his hand, Elijah descended into the darkness. The trapdoor slammed shut behind him, and the room above fell silent, as if to mark the beginning of a new chapter in his nightmare. He didn't know where this tunnel would lead, but he knew it was his best shot at evading the people who were after him. They were too close, he couldn't let them catch him. The walls of the passage were damp and cold, and the further he descended, the more oppressive the air became. But the tunnel was long, stretching for what felt like miles. Elijah's mind raced. He couldn't help but think about what he had learned over the past few days. The sequence. Dr. Gaines's warnings. The cryptic message from Dr. Hayes. But most of all, he thought about the chilling sentence in the document, "The sequence is not meant to be solved." Was that the reason they were after him? Did they want to keep the sequence hidden? Or was there something far more dangerous about it that Elijah had yet to uncover? He didn't have the answers, but one thing was clear, there was no turning back now. The deeper he went, the more everything seemed to fall into place. The stakes were higher than he ever imagined. And his pursuit of the sequence had just become a fight for his life. He had no idea how much further the tunnel stretched, but he had to keep moving. There were too many unanswered questions, too many dangers lurking around every corner. But one thing was certain, he couldn't stop now. Not when he was this close. Not when everything he'd worked for was within reach. Then, a loud noise echoed behind him. A screeching sound, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, and getting closer. They were following him. Elijah's blood ran cold as he pushed forward, running now, heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the footsteps growing louder, but he refused to look back. There was no time to think, only to act. He had to outpace them. He had to find a way out. The tunnel began to curve, twisting left and right, its path becoming more erratic. He didn't know how much longer he could keep this up. The tunnel was narrow, forcing him to crouch low as he sprinted through the darkness. His breath came in ragged gasps, but he pushed on, his eyes scanning for any sign of escape. And then, ahead of him, he saw a faint glimmer of light. It was small, distant, but unmistakable. There was a way out. His pace quickened, urgency fueling every step. The light grew brighter, and the tunnel began to open up. Elijah felt a surge of hope, he might actually make it out. He could outrun them. But as he neared the opening, something felt off. The air ahead was cooler, fresher, and the light flickered in a strange pattern, like something out of place in the otherwise pitch-black tunnel. He slowed his pace, scanning the area ahead. His senses were on high alert. The light was coming from a small crack in the stone walls, a narrow slit that seemed to open up into another space beyond. But there was something about it that made his stomach twist. He was almost there. And then he heard it. A low, guttural growl from the darkness behind him. Elijah froze, his blood turning to ice. The sound wasn't human. It wasn't even close. He spun around, his mind racing for an explanation. But there was nothing. No one. Only the empty stretch of tunnel. His chest tightened, and for a moment, he thought he imagined it. But then came the unmistakable sound of something heavy dragging across the floor, something that didn't belong in the tunnel. Fear gripped him like a vice. He couldn't go back. He couldn't outrun whatever that was. But the light ahead was still there. Faint, but constant. A beacon of hope. And so, he made the choice. With a single glance back into the darkness behind him, Elijah pushed forward, diving toward the crack in the wall. He didn't know what lay on the other side, but he knew it was his only chance. He squeezed through the opening and found himself in a much larger room, vast, echoing, and completely empty. But it wasn't the emptiness that caught his attention. It was the structure in the center of the room. A massive stone pedestal, ancient and worn, with something on top. It was a key. Elijah stood frozen, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts. The stone pedestal before him seemed to pulse with an ancient energy, as if it were calling to him. His eyes locked on the object resting atop it, a small, intricate key. It looked ordinary at first glance, nothing spectacular. But the craftsmanship was unlike anything he had ever seen. The key was small, no longer than his hand, with intricate patterns carved into its surface, some symbols that seemed familiar, and others that made his mind itch with curiosity. He could feel the weight of it, not just physically but symbolically. This key, it was the key. There was no other explanation. It was connected to everything that had led him here, the Hypatia sequence, the mysterious warnings, and now the tunnel, the chase, the danger. But why was it here, in the middle of this secret chamber, buried deep beneath his family's house? What was it guarding? A shiver ran down his spine as his fingers hovered above it. He wanted to reach out, to take it. But there was something unnerving about it, like it had been waiting for someone, waiting for him, to find it. His mind raced. What did this key unlock? And why hadn't anyone ever mentioned it? There was no record of it in any of the family journals or archives he'd ever seen. Yet, here it was, glowing faintly in the dim light of the hidden room. With one final deep breath, Elijah reached out and carefully wrapped his fingers around the cold, metallic surface of the key. The moment his fingers made contact, a soft hum echoed through the room. The ground beneath him seemed to tremble just slightly, as if the key had triggered something far larger than he could understand. His heart skipped a beat. Was the room changing? Or was it just his mind, racing with too many possibilities? Elijah shook his head and focused. It was just a key. Just a key, and yet, it felt like more. It felt like the final piece of a puzzle he hadn't known he was solving. He slipped the key into his pocket, suddenly aware of how exposed he was. The footsteps, no, the dragging sound, was growing closer again, echoing through the passageway behind him. Whoever was following him wasn't far off. And now that he had the key, he was sure things would only get more dangerous. He had to move. Fast. The room was still eerily quiet, save for the growing sounds of pursuit. Elijah's eyes darted around, scanning the walls of the chamber for another exit. There had to be one. This room was too important, too old, not to have been designed with a way out. His gaze landed on the wall to his right. In the faint light, he could just make out a faint outline, an engraving, an indentation that looked like it was part of the stone itself. The engraving appeared to be a door, but it was unlike any door he had ever seen. The design was alien, not a traditional doorframe, but more like a portal, a symbol of something ancient, cryptic. His pulse quickened as his hand instinctively moved toward it. Could the key fit here? Was this the lock it was meant to open? He didn't know, but there was only one way to find out. His fingers pressed against the cold stone, tracing the symbols on the wall. They were ancient, markings of an era long forgotten, but there was something undeniably familiar about them. The same symbols he had seen in the handwritten notes, in the scattered documents he'd uncovered in the last few days. His heart pounded harder as a strange recognition began to creep into his thoughts. This was no coincidence. The symbols seemed to come alive under his touch. They glowed faintly, like embers smoldering in the dark, responding to his presence, to his touch. His eyes widened. The key, it was connected to these symbols. Suddenly, there was a click, followed by the low sound of stone shifting. The wall in front of him slowly began to slide open, revealing a narrow passage behind it. Elijah stepped back, stunned. The hidden room was bigger than he had imagined. And now, there was a way forward. His mind raced as he looked over his shoulder, the sounds of the pursuers now too close for comfort. There wasn't any time to lose. Without hesitation, he stepped into the passageway, the door sliding shut behind him with a soft, almost inaudible click. The air was cooler here, almost damp, and as he moved forward, he could see the walls were lined with more symbols, more cryptic writings. They seemed to stretch endlessly, and the passage seemed to stretch far deeper into the earth. He wasn't sure how far he was from the surface, but it felt like he was moving deeper and deeper into the earth's very heart. His footsteps echoed in the narrow corridor, and each sound felt magnified, like they were announcing his every move. There was no turning back now. As he walked, his thoughts collided with each other. The key, the symbols, it was all connected to the Hypatia sequence, to the mystery Dr. Hayes had entrusted him with. There was no doubt in his mind now that he had uncovered something ancient, something bigger than a mere mathematical puzzle. He had stumbled upon a hidden truth, a secret buried beneath layers of history. But who had hidden it? And why? The further he walked, the more the air seemed to thicken. It was as though the passage itself was alive, breathing, watching. Elijah's mind raced to connect the dots. Was the sequence just the beginning of this mystery? Was it possible that the sequence was a code to unlock this very path, this hidden world beneath the earth? Suddenly, he stopped dead in his tracks. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through the ground beneath him. It was the same hum he'd felt earlier when he touched the key. The energy in the air was thickening, pulsating around him, like the room was alive. He turned, and before he could react, the faintest shadow moved in the distance, just ahead. A figure. Elijah's breath caught in his throat. He wasn't alone. Who's there? Elijah's voice echoed down the passage, but there was no response. The figure moved again, only this time, it was clearer. It wasn't human, at least not in the way Elijah had imagined. The figure moved closer, and Elijah took a step back, his hand reaching instinctively for the key in his pocket. The figure spoke, its voice a low whisper that made Elijah's skin crawl. "You've come far, Elijah. But this is where your journey ends." The shadow loomed before him, silent yet menacing. Elijah's heart pounded as he gripped the key tightly in his pocket, his mind a whirl of confusion and fear. The figure didn't speak at first. It simply stood there, watching him with an intensity that sent a chill crawling up his spine. Elijah couldn't see their face, but he could sense the weight of their presence, a suffocating force that filled the passage with an almost palpable tension. His instincts screamed at him to run, to flee back into the tunnel, but there was nowhere to go. The stone walls were too narrow, the path ahead too treacherous. "I'm not here to hurt you," the figure said at last, their voice low, almost soothing, but there was a metallic edge to it that made Elijah's skin crawl. Elijah didn't respond immediately. Instead, his eyes darted to the shadows, searching for any sign of movement. The figure's voice was familiar, he had heard it before, or at least something like it. But the words were jumbled in his memory, lost amidst the chaos of the past few days. Who were they? Why did they know his name? "You don't remember me, do you?" the figure asked, as though reading his thoughts. "Of course, how could you?" Elijah narrowed his eyes, trying to see through the darkness. The figure stepped forward, and for the first time, a dim light from a distant torch illuminated their form, a tall, imposing silhouette. The figure's face was hidden beneath a dark hood, but their voice now rang clearer, more familiar. "No," Elijah said, his voice tense. "I don't know you. Who are you?" The figure paused, their head tilting slightly as if considering something. You will soon enough. But not yet. The words were a warning, soft yet filled with a quiet threat. Elijah's hand hovered over the key in his pocket, his mind racing with questions. What was going on? Who was this person? And how did they know about the sequence? I'm just here to help you, the figure continued, their voice almost too smooth, too rehearsed. The sequence you're trying to solve, Elijah, it's not what you think. There's more to it than you realize. Elijah took a step back, his mind suddenly alert. What do you mean? What's more to it? The figure took another step closer, their face still obscured by shadow. The sequence is a key to something far greater, far older than you can possibly comprehend. It's not just a puzzle. It's a doorway. And now, you've opened it. The weight of the words hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. A doorway? Elijah felt a surge of dread crawl up his spine. He had thought he was simply unraveling a mathematical mystery, something that would push the boundaries of human knowledge. But this? This was something else entirely. What do you want from me? Elijah demanded, his voice rising with growing anxiety. The figure's chuckle was soft but chilling, reverberating in the small, stone chamber. What I want doesn't matter. What matters is that you don't get caught in the web of it all. Because once you do, there's no turning back. You've already come too far. The doors have already been opened, and now they'll be coming for you. Elijah's stomach tightened. Who will? The ones who've been hiding for so long. The ones who control the knowledge, the ones who control everything. You're not the only one who knows about the sequence, Elijah. You're not the first. Elijah's mind reeled. More people. Who were these people? And why had they kept the truth from him? His fingers clenched around the key in his pocket, his body tense, ready to spring into action. I don't have time for games, he said, his voice firm. What do you want with the key? The figure tilted their head, considering him carefully. The key is your protection. And your curse. You'll need it to survive the trials ahead. There are forces at play far beyond what you can see. They are watching you, Elijah. They've been watching you since you first cracked the sequence. The moment you unlocked the code, you signed your fate. Elijah's mind flashed back to the first time he solved the Hypatia sequence. The rush of triumph, the exhilaration of understanding something so profound. He hadn't known that unlocking it would lead him here. That it would drag him into a world of shadows, conspiracies, and unknown enemies. But why me? Elijah asked, his voice trembling with frustration. Why am I the one who's being targeted? What's so special about me? The figure stepped forward again, this time just close enough that Elijah could feel their presence without seeing their face clearly. Because you're the last one. The last person who can finish the work. The last one who can decipher the final pieces. The final equation. A cold shiver ran down Elijah's spine. The last one. The final equation. He didn't understand. What was the figure talking about? Don't play coy, the figure said with a low laugh. You've already figured out more than anyone could have hoped. The sequence isn't just a number, Elijah. It's a formula. A map. And if you're lucky, if you survive long enough, you might just find out where it leads. But know this, those who come after you aren't interested in your survival. They want the sequence. And they'll stop at nothing to get it. Elijah's mind swirled, his thoughts racing, trying to process everything. He had only ever thought of the sequence as a mathematical puzzle, an unsolved enigma left by the brilliant mathematician Hypatia. But now, everything had changed. The sequence was more than that. It was a map, a key to something larger, something far more dangerous. The figure took a step back, as though preparing to leave. You'll have to decide quickly, Elijah. The longer you stand here, the closer they get. And when they find you, they won't be as kind as I've been. Before Elijah could respond, the figure turned and melted back into the darkness, their footsteps echoing away down the passage. He stood there, motionless, his mind whirling. What had just happened? Who were they? And why had they helped him? One thing was clear, the game had changed. He wasn't just a man solving a mathematical riddle anymore. He was caught in something far bigger, far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. And the worst part? He wasn't sure he was ready for it. The air in the tunnel was heavy, suffocating. Elijah's heart beat in his chest like a drum, its rhythm a constant reminder of the urgency pressing down on him. He had barely taken 2 steps before the weight of everything. The cryptic figure's warning, the key in his pocket, the knowledge that they were coming for him, settled like a stone in his gut. He had to keep moving, had to finish this, but where was the next step? The deeper he ventured into the underground labyrinth, the more he realized he was tangled in something far greater than he had ever imagined. What was this place? And why had it been hidden from the world? His fingers brushed the symbols along the walls again, tracing the patterns, desperately searching for answers. These markings, these cryptic signs, had been with him for so long. They had led him to this moment, but now that he stood on the threshold of understanding, he couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was just out of his reach. The sequence. The final equation. It wasn't just a puzzle anymore, it was a key to something that had been locked away for centuries. But what did it unlock? And why did it matter so much to the ones who were hunting him? Elijah's thoughts were interrupted by a faint sound. It was distant, but unmistakable, the echo of footsteps, the shuffle of movement. He wasn't alone. They were closing in. He couldn't afford to hesitate any longer. The final equation was waiting, and time was running out. With renewed urgency, Elijah quickened his pace, moving deeper into the darkened tunnel. He could feel the weight of the key pressing against his chest, as if urging him forward. It had to be the answer. He had come this far, and now there was no turning back. Ahead, the tunnel opened into a small chamber. At the center stood an ancient stone pedestal, its surface worn and etched with more symbols. In the dim light, Elijah could make out a strange, geometric pattern, one that seemed to match the ones he had seen in the notes, those endless equations and algorithms that had consumed him for weeks. This was it. The place where everything would come together. Elijah stepped closer, his breath catching in his throat. The pedestal was not empty. Resting on it was a scroll, old, yellowed with age, its edges frayed. It looked fragile, as if it might disintegrate at the slightest touch. But Elijah knew this was the key, the final piece of the puzzle. The answer he had been searching for was here, hidden away for centuries. He reached out, his fingers trembling as they brushed over the delicate surface of the scroll. Slowly, carefully, he unrolled it, the parchment crackling under his touch. And there, written in the same strange symbols he had seen in the tunnel, was the final equation. Elijah's eyes widened as he read the symbols, his mind racing to process them. It was complex, more complex than anything he had ever encountered. But there was something familiar about it. A pattern. A rhythm. It was as if the sequence had been leading him here all along, and now, at this moment, everything was falling into place. He glanced down at the key in his hand. It had to fit. The sequence, the symbols, the key, it was all connected. With a shaky breath, he held the key above the scroll, aligning it with the markings on the paper. The moment the key touched the parchment, a soft hum filled the room. The air around him seemed to pulse with energy. The symbols on the scroll began to glow, their light growing brighter with each passing second. Elijah's heart raced, his mind struggling to keep up with the whirlwind of thoughts and emotions flooding through him. He had done it. He had unlocked the final equation. But then, nothing. The light faded, and the room fell silent. Elijah's breath caught in his throat. Had he failed? Before he could react, a voice echoed through the chamber, deep and resonant, vibrating the very walls. "You've solved it," the voice said, and this time, it wasn't the cryptic figure. It was something else, something much older. You've unlocked the final equation. Elijah spun around, his eyes wide with disbelief. Who are you? He demanded, his voice shaking with fear and frustration. The voice chuckled, low and amused. Who do you think I am, Elijah? I've been with you every step of the way. Watching. Waiting. Elijah's heart raced as the realization dawned on him. This was no ordinary voice. This was the entity that had been behind everything, the one who had orchestrated the sequence, the one who had guided him to this point. And now, it was finally revealing itself. I don't understand, Elijah said, his voice cracking. What do you want from me? The voice was silent for a moment, and when it spoke again, it was with a sense of finality. I want you to finish the work. I want you to complete the cycle. You've unlocked the sequence, but you haven't yet unlocked the door. Elijah's mind spun. A door. The key, the sequence, it was all leading him towards something else, something beyond his understanding. Complete the cycle, Elijah muttered, more to himself than to the voice. The word seemed to echo in the chamber, reverberating off the walls like a prophecy. Suddenly, the ground beneath Elijah's feet trembled. The room seemed to shift, the walls groaning with the weight of ancient forces being unleashed. The pedestal shook, and the scroll fluttered in Elijah's hands as if caught by an invisible wind. A low, rumbling sound filled the chamber. Finish what you started, Elijah, the voice commanded, its tone no longer soft, but insistent, urgent. The door will open, and the truth will be revealed. But beware, the price of knowledge is high. Elijah's head swam with the weight of the words. The door. The truth. The price. He hadn't been ready for this. He had thought he was simply solving a mathematical puzzle, unlocking a hidden mystery. But this? This was something far greater, far more dangerous. But it was too late to turn back now. He had come this far. There was no escaping the path that lay ahead. Taking a deep breath, Elijah stepped forward. The pedestal before him began to glow, and the scroll in his hands shimmered with an otherworldly light. The door was opening. The final equation had been solved. But what awaited him on the other side? The chamber was alive with an unnatural energy, the air vibrating with a force that Elijah could almost feel in his bones. His fingers tightened around the glowing scroll as the pedestal before him rumbled, its ancient stone shifting under the pressure of someone, awakening from its long slumber. He could hear the low hum of a mechanism, the sound of ancient secrets being unlocked. The door was opening. He stepped back, his heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and dread. The walls of the chamber creaked as though they were coming to life, the stone sliding away to reveal an archway, shrouded in mist, that led into total darkness. He couldn't see beyond it, but he could sense that whatever lay ahead was not something he could walk away from. This was it. The culmination of everything he had worked for, everything he had risked. For weeks, Elijah had dedicated himself to cracking the Hypatia sequence, believing it to be nothing more than a challenging puzzle, a mathematical riddle left unsolved for over 50 years. He had pored over the numbers, deciphered the code, and unlocked a truth that no one had been able to reach. But now, with the door standing wide open before him, he realized that the sequence had never been just a puzzle. It had been a key. A key to something much greater. A voice, deep and resonant, echoed through the chamber, as though it were coming from the walls themselves. "Welcome, Elijah," it said. The voice was familiar, but there was something different about it, something ancient, almost eternal. "You have unlocked the door. You have completed the final equation." Elijah's throat tightened. "What is this place? What is it I've unlocked?" The mist in the archway shifted, swirling like smoke caught in a breeze. In the center of the mist, a figure began to emerge, a silhouette, blurred at first, but gradually coming into focus. Elijah's breath caught in his throat as the figure became clearer. It was a woman. Her features were impossibly beautiful, her eyes shimmering with a light that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the physical world. She was dressed in ancient robes, the fabric flowing and shimmering, as if it were made of starlight itself. She looked both familiar and foreign, as though she had stepped out of a dream. A vision from a distant past. The figure stepped forward, her gaze locking with Elijah's. Her voice was soft, yet carried the weight of centuries. "You've been looking for answers, Elijah. But the truth you seek is not what you expect. It never was." Elijah's breath quickened. "Who are you?" he demanded. "What is this? What have I uncovered?" The woman smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "I am the keeper of the sequence. The one who has been watching over it for centuries. And you, Elijah, are the one who has brought it back into the world." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Elijah's mind raced. The keeper of the sequence? Watching over it for centuries? None of this made sense. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why me? Why now?" The woman's gaze softened, and she stepped closer. "You were chosen, Elijah. The sequence was not meant to be solved by just anyone. Your mind, your ability to see patterns where others cannot, are the reason the sequence has come to light once more. But with it comes great power, and with that power, great responsibility." Elijah's chest tightened. Responsibility for what? The woman's eyes flickered with something that might have been pity. The sequence was never just a mathematical formula. It's a map, a key to the knowledge of the ancients. Knowledge that was buried away to prevent its misuse. When you solved the sequence, you opened the door, but you also opened the floodgates to that knowledge. Elijah shook his head, trying to process her words. The weight of the truth was starting to sink in. This wasn't just about solving an equation. This was about unleashing something that had been hidden away for centuries. Something that had the potential to change the world, or destroy it. But why hide it? Elijah asked, his voice growing more desperate. Why keep it from the world? The woman's eyes darkened. Because there are forces that seek to control it. There are those who would use the knowledge for their own gain, to manipulate the world and bend it to their will. The sequence was meant to remain a secret. And now that it has been uncovered, the battle for its control has already begun. Elijah's mind spun. The people who had been hunting him, the ones who had wanted the sequence, were they part of these forces? And if so, who were they? And what would happen if they succeeded in using the knowledge that he had uncovered? "The door is open now, Elijah," the woman said, her voice quiet but insistent. "The world is not prepared for what's behind it. Not yet." Elijah's heart raced. "What are you saying?" "You have two choices," the woman said, her eyes locking onto his. "You can close the door, seal the knowledge away once more. Or you can let it unfold, but be prepared to face the consequences of your decision. There is no going back once the door is open." Elijah stood frozen, caught between the two paths. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the risks he had taken, the people who had mocked him, and the unknown forces that were closing in. He thought about the truth, about the knowledge that had been buried away for centuries, and he wondered if the world was ready for it. But deep down, Elijah knew that closing the door was not an option. The truth had been revealed to him for a reason. And if he closed it now, he would be denying not only himself but the entire world the chance to understand what had been hidden away for so long. "I don't know what the consequences will be," Elijah said, his voice shaky but resolute. "But I can't close the door now. The world needs to know." The woman studied him for a moment, as if weighing his words, before nodding slowly. "Very well, Elijah. The choice has been made." A low rumble echoed through the chamber, and the mist began to dissipate. The figure stepped back, her form fading into the light as she disappeared into the darkness beyond the archway. Elijah stood there for a long moment, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. The sequence had led him here, to the truth, to this moment where the fate of the world hung in the balance. He didn't know what would come next. He didn't know if he had made the right choice. But one thing was certain, the door was open now, and there was no turning back. With the truth revealed, the journey that Elijah had started now shifted from a quest for knowledge to a battle for control, not just of the sequence, but of the future itself. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?